Out here on the Navajo Nation, I've been in EMS most of my whole life, my whole career. You might hear how some parts of the res don't have electricity, how some parts aren't even fully developed, based off of other standards that is. While in some places it might be true, we do at least have first responders, on a much smaller scale. And with that comes long hours, far away, isolated, sometimes even in some sketchy, strange, scary places. And throughout my career, I've seen a lot of things. Some calls were just strange, others were terrifying, and some, well, I still don't have an explanation for them. I do want to share a few of those stories with you. Some stuff will sound beyond crazy. You might not even believe me. When most people think of us, they think about emergency services, first responders. They think about heroes and those who can save lives. Speeding down the highway, getting there just in time. A hospital maybe 5 minutes away. I want you to step out of this fake view, because on the res, a quick phone call can be 3 hours one way, and sometimes even 6. Whenever we leave the station, once you head into the canyons and the back roads, those dirt roads go through everywhere, twist and turning. You're on your own basically. No fire trucks, no big crews, no police cruiser to guide you. Just you, your partner, and whatever it is that we're responding to. Don't even think about pulling up Google Maps. They don't have pictures, nor the dirt roads once you get deep in the res. Sometimes we get calls like someone having a heat stroke in the middle of summer, a rollover on a curve at night. Maybe somebody passed by and saw a car and called it in. And then to find the places sometimes takes longer than the time it took to get there. Violent incidents too, stabbings, shootings, alcohol related. Everything that your big fancy cities have, we see it out here too. Except you're treating patients in the open desert, in the middle of nowhere. We also don't have that many workers, and the ones that we do have, they can be basics, recruits, newbies. The pay isn't that great, but we still do it, because we're not just about saving lives. It's about serving your own people. There's something that ties and connects us all. Another major difference with us over here is dealing with more than just injuries and illnesses. There are traditions, beliefs and teachings and rules that are tied into every response that we get. Sometimes you arrive on scene and you find a person who refuses transport, not because they're stubborn, but because they want to be treated in a traditional way. Maybe a medicine man is already on the way. Maybe a ceremony needs to be done before anything else. And sometimes you have to respect that. One of the rules is that those who follow the traditional way should not be around death, trauma, or violent injuries. They're supposed to keep their spirit clean, untouched by the things that we face every day. Think about it. We're already frowned upon by some people because of the work that we do. We help others out, but it does get ugly sometimes, because some first responders still choose to help. I mean, who else is going to drive 6 hours through snow and darkness to pull a stranger out of a wrecked truck? We get yelled at. You just gotta learn how to balance it, our help, with their beliefs. It was around 2008 in North Arizona, just on the border of the Hopi res. I had just gotten my medical license a few weeks ago, and it was one of my first times that I was in a third hand on the ambulance with another coworker. I was working night shift on a spring night. It was a little bit chilly. The moon wasn't really out, so it was just dark out there. We were stationed outside working from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. We got paged out for a man down call to the Hopi village with no other information. We do sometimes ask for assistance from the police, especially to secure the scene, just because that's standard protocol. And a lot of times if it's a nighttime call, there's a possibility of domestic violence or even rowdy people. But there's only very few police presence on the res. And on this night, there were no police units available to respond with us. We were on our own. We responded code 2, lights on but no sirens, and we made our way to the town, which was only about 10 minutes away. We arrived on scene and immediately saw our patient laying on the ground. He was in the front of the house, covered in dirt. He was breathing, but drunk, and he looked like someone had beat him up. It didn't require us to take him, but we still decided to transport him to the hospital to sober up, and just to be safe. We did decide to check his house, found some drunks. It might have been the people that assaulted him, and we kicked them out. There were no street lights. The only lights we had were the big lights on the sides of our ambulance, which casted a big circle of light around the unit. There weren't that many porch lights, so it was pretty dark aside from the ambulance area. What I first noticed was weird. Only a few residents came out. Weird because it was around 2 a.m. and a bit creepy because, again, no lights, and all you saw were the silhouettes out there. But it's a small town, so I didn't think too much of it. It was sort of scary though, because they all stayed just on the outside of the line that the lights made. I could tell they were just neighbors, but they seemed nervous, or somewhat scared to even try to get close. I forgot to mention that when we got there were a lot of dogs barking, and all the normal noises, bugs and everything else. We were outside with the patient, just about to get him into the stretcher. Out of nowhere, there was a very loud howling. Pretty much sounded like a werewolf from a movie. It lasted for about 15 seconds. We did look around, not because of the howling, but because of how creepy the whole situation now seemed to be. Especially because it sounded like a person doing a wolf call, but it was way too loud to be done by a person, unless they were standing around us. What the hell was that? I said. My partner just shrugged, while looking around nervous, and then looked back around, and all the people were gone. There was no one around now. You wouldn't even know that they were there. Even the people that we kicked out of the house were nowhere to be seen now, and all the noises were gone. All the dogs immediately stopped barking, which actually never happens. If anything, the opposite always happens when there's a noise, or a stray dog or something. We took the sign of everyone getting out of there as a cue to get out. I remember my partner was like, "Let's get the fuck out of here." And we loaded up the patient and drove out fast. The fastest that I ever seen a non-critical patient get transported. Obviously this wasn't a Skinwalker story, but it just creeped me out. This experience actually happened a year or two ago. I had picked up a 12-hour shift. I hadn't worked one in a long time, since taking on more supervisor stuff. But a few of the crew needed a day off, so I just said fuck it, and I'll cover. I was with one of our recruits, a young guy. I remember he was still wanting to get a workout in before things get crazy. So we drove out to the chapter house gym, because that's pretty much the only gym that's open on a weekend around us. He went inside to go lift. I stayed in the ambulance, doing some reports and such, just sitting in the driver's seat. It was quiet, no wind, no rain, just a few parked cars far off in the lot. About 25 to 30 minutes go by, and out of nowhere, the whole ambulance shakes. Not sure if you've ever been inside a truck, but when someone gets in the back you can feel the whole vehicle dip. That's exactly how it felt. It felt like someone stepped onto the back bumper and then hopped off. I checked all my mirrors. I thought it was a new guy possibly opening the back, but when I looked, there was nobody back there. Nobody walking around. Parking lot is empty, and the weather is still dead. And I know how that bumper feels when someone steps on it. I mean, we do get patients on there all the time. I told the recruit later and he was like, "Man, that's weird." But he didn't even know what to say. I brushed it off until the next night. I come in on Monday, and the crew from the day after walks in with this look like something messed with them. First thing they ask me is, "Hey, did anything weird happen to you last night?" I said no. Apparently they had just came back from a call. They're sitting down, doing their mileage and reports, when suddenly the whole truck starts to move like someone is walking around in the back. They open the back and they find nothing. At that point I'm thinking, alright, that's too similar to be random. But it gets worse. A few days later, the same crew comes in again. They tell me the night before was one of the weirdest nights that they ever had on the job. They started getting calls around 11 p.m. all over the place. As they started driving, the first thing they noticed was coyotes. Now, out here, you see coyotes all the time. That's normal. Don't believe the bullshit lies on how every coyote is a skinwalker. However, do worry if you keep seeing them. And that's what the crew said. They said they kept seeing them over and over again. 5 different coyotes that night, all just standing by the road watching the ambulance drive by. You know, that's not a good sign. That's always a warning. But they kept going, since it was a busy night. They get a call on the way there, and that's when something flies across the road in front of them. They thought maybe a big bird or something, but it flies directly in front of them, and it causes them to swerve to the point where they almost flip. Basically, they spun but didn't flip. They both panic and just try their best to calm down. A few minutes later, they get their shit together and start driving again. Except this time they start praying, and then they hear something land on top of the ambulance. They aren't sure what to do. So my buddy says that he hits the brakes, and in front of them, they see it. A big ass owl, just standing in the middle of the street. It's got its wings open. Have you ever seen an owl with its wings open and swaying from side to side? I haven't, not in person at least. But that's how they described it to me. After a staring contest, it swoops away. They continue driving. They hear and see this thing swooping near the windows, crossing the headlights, just taking the whole time with them. They finally stop when they get to the house, turn on all the floodlights, shine a flashlight all around them, and it's gone. Owls at night, showing up like that, it's a bad sign. It's an omen. And by the way, they didn't even pick up the patient when they got there. Something about he didn't want to be transported, so they just headed back. On the drive, they start seeing all kinds of animals. They're all standing on the side of the road, running across the headlights. Then, my buddy, the driver, he tells me this part real quiet. He said he was gripping the steering wheel when he hears somebody whisper his name to his right ear. He quickly turned to his right. He looked at his buddy, and then he saw it. It was an owl witch. It was clinging, hanging, or floating from the passenger window. It made him slam on the brakes, which pushed both of them towards the dashboard. His buddy was like, "What the fuck, dude?" The weirdest part of everything is that the ambulance shaking also happened to us. And then they had that whole night of signs, animals, the owl following them. I almost feel like something was tagging along with the cruise for a couple of nights, maybe watching, moving with us. Now, let me get to the scary experiences. Me and my partner were along the highway one night. It was during a police chase. We were told to be on standby because it looked like the car wasn't stopping, and the wife had called saying that she was being assaulted, and he basically was trying to force her in the car. Didn't know what to expect, so we were just sitting there with the lights off, just the two of us parked in this huge empty valley, waiting for updates, trying to stay alert. Out there, most places don't have street lights. We were both talking with each other when something caught my eye on the road ahead. At first, I thought it was a reflection from a distant vehicle. You know how when a vehicle is coming down far away, you sometimes see two lights, but there were no cars coming. Then I realized those weren't headlights. Now I want you to picture yourself in the middle of the night, in the dark, between hills and ridges. No houses, nothing, nobody around you. So these two headlights, they were too small. On top of this, they were a light shade of red when they got closer. But then, they just started bouncing across the pavement. Then two more appeared beside them, and they started moving fast. They darted back and forth across the highway, right in front of us. Both of us were staring straight at them, trying to figure out what we were actually looking at, waiting until these things, whatever they were, crossed in front of us again. When they did, I flipped on the headlights. The second that the light hit the road, they disappeared. Just gone. Fucking weird. The call was canceled because we were told that the guy actually stopped after running out of gas. They were still about an hour away. The next day my partner came in looking uneasy. He told me that he was talking to his grandfather about what we saw, and his grandfather is a medicine man, and he did a small ceremony for him, and he told him that there were two skinwalkers out there, and that they were just messing with us, not to harm us, because if they wanted to, they would have. Skinwalkers, they're people who walk a dark path, who trade pieces of themselves for something twisted in return. They mimic, and they wander the roads at night, especially when everything is quiet. My partner and I both received a blessing after that, a cleansing. Now, I'll get to the terrifying ones. One night, we got called out for a welfare check on an elder, in the middle of nowhere, like a lot of places out here. There's no lights, no neighbors for miles. We get to the mobile home and nothing. Nobody's outside. Door is cracked open a bit. My partner stays outside while I step in, and there he is, the old man, sitting in this beat-up recliner, wide awake. He's staring straight ahead like he's watching something on a wall. But there's no TV, nothing. He's just looking. I'll talk to him. Nothing. I wave. No response. By this point, I'm used to working around a lot of different people, so it's not new. I start checking his vitals. The whole time he's just staring at the wall. His vitals are good. He's breathing fine. There's no signs of a fall. No signs that he's been out of the chair at all. So I just ask him, "So, why did you call us?" When I ask him this, he turns around slowly and looks at me. He then whispers, I didn't." I'm standing there confused. We were told it came from this house, and he's the only one here. So I ask again. He didn't call. That's when he suddenly looks past me, over my shoulder, like if somebody's walking behind me in the hallway. It seems like his eyes start tracking something. I know my partner is outside, so it's just me in there. Then the old man says something that I still remember. "It came in with you." And right then, the smell of burnt sage fills the whole room. There's no smoke or ash, nothing burning. And then start asking the other questions about his mental health. I also asked him if he needed help, or if he needed to go somewhere, that we could take him, or even take him to a family member, or something else. He refuses, says that he'll be fine, and that he doesn't want to see it again, whatever that means. And as we're walking back to the ambulance, I hear someone step into the gravel, clear as day. The crunch that you hear when somebody is stepping on gravel. I turn to the side, and there's nobody there. I get creeped out and just speed walk to the ambulance, and we get out of there. Now this one, to this day I still don't have a good answer for it. We get called out for a chest pain call. An older woman. She lives alone in this old little trailer, It's tucked way out in a little canyon. I do wonder how people even get groceries there, or what they might be even doing out there. My partner stays outside. I go inside. She's sitting at the table, hunched over her sweater. She's breathing, and she's talking. Alert. Apparently all she needs is a quick transport. I get her onto the wheelchair. I cover her with a blanket that she had. I start rolling her down the hall. Everything's good. Everything is normal. She suddenly gets a hold of my wrist and then whispers, "Don't let him take me back." I'm all like, "Who's trying to take you back? To where?" She then raised her arm and points behind me. Of course, there's nothing there. Just a dark room. I assume that someone else is here, so I do go into the room, but nobody is there. When I turn back, she's gone. What the fuck? Like she's nowhere to be found. The blanket is still on the chair. I quickly grab the chair and go outside. What if she started walking towards the ambulance or fell? But when I do step outside, I don't see her anywhere. My friend is inside with the light on, and he just looks at me confused. I can see why, because I'm sure my look was one of confusion as well. It was like she just disappeared between the house and the ambulance. I then run to tell my partner, and we look all around the trailer home. We panic. We start looking everywhere, calling out. I then run back to the trailer, and the door is shut. I try to knock. It's locked from the inside. We spend about 30 minutes knocking on the door and the windows. We just end up leaving. We do end up calling in to see if anyone else had gone out there or any info on the call. The dispatcher looks at the address and goes, "What's the name of the person?" That home has been abandoned for some time now. We had a call one night that I still don't really like thinking or talking about it because of what happened. It was out in one of those isolated parts of the res where everything is just dirt. We got dispatched for a woman not responding. No further info. After a few hours, when we finally found the spot, the family was already waiting outside. At least I thought it was family. And the first thing I noticed wasn't them. It was the smell. Something sour, spoiled. Both of us walk inside, and we see the setup right away. Someone had been doing a ceremony. There's all sorts of powders on the ground. A circle of ash. A small fire was still going. But something was wrong. The woman, she looked to be in her 20s. She was lying on the floor, breathing fast, sweating like she had a fever. However, what didn't sit right with me was her eyes. They kept flicking up, like she was looking at something on the ceiling. I got down next to her and she didn't even look at me. She did whisper something in Navajo, but she kept shifting around, small jerks, her eyes flickering. At some point I swear they even rolled back. I looked at her family, and that's when I realized there were no adults here. I mean, they were, but there wasn't a dad or a mom. I then asked what happened, and everybody got quiet, like they didn't want to say anything. Then, an older woman came out from a bedroom, and she was like, "They tried doing a ceremony they weren't supposed to do. They came to me for help, but I told them it might be too late." I was confused at this point. Everyone was yelling to do something. Was she gonna be alright? But then I started asking, "What were y'all doing?" I remember asking and nobody could give me a good answer. Now personally, I won't tell you too much, but basically they were doing a ceremony they had no business doing, and stuff went wrong. They came over to Grandma for help. Apparently one of them was her sister, because she was like, "Don't touch my sister unless you have to." I told her that we needed to take her in. She was starting to shake, and her heart was all over the place. and this was now an urgent situation. I told him that she needed to get transported, that she was getting worse by the minute. The grandma shook her head. You can't take her. You aren't the only one who came here tonight. Thought she was talking about other family, or maybe someone stopped by before us. And right when she said it, the woman on the floor arched upward, almost like somebody had grabbed her spine and was trying to pull her towards the ceiling. She then let out this sound, not a scream, more like a growl. Her eyes rolled back, and then she yelled out my coworker's name. He stumbled back, and he swore that he felt somebody grab his shirt, even though nobody was behind him. The grandmother then suddenly screamed at us, "Leave, now. If you want to take something with you, stay. If not, go. We'll take care of this on our own." We backed out, and as we're passing through the doorway, the woman on the ground, she turned her head to us and whispered something that we couldn't hear. We loaded our gear, didn't even secure half of it. We ended up leaving, against everything that we're trained to do. We tried to get them to reconsider, but they refused. We got back to the station shaken up. We didn't talk much. We didn't sleep. 2 days later, dispatch told us the woman died the next night. The grandmother had said that she lost the fight, that whatever tried to come through, it took too much from her. And here's the scary thing. The grandma said that they didn't blame us. She said the ceremony was their mistake, but they were glad we left when we did, because, in her own words, it wasn't there for her. It was looking for someone else. I could sit here and tell you stories like this for weeks. That's the thing about working out here. The longer you stay on the res, the more you realize how many strange, unexplainable things you end up carrying with you. These are just the ones that came to my head tonight, the ones that I'm actually allowed to share. And believe me, what I told you is nothing compared to the deeper stuff that people talk about. I heard stories about skinwalkers appearing in the middle of a healing ceremony that was done at the wrong time, about teenagers messing around with something sacred, laughing like it's a joke, until they end up getting something that follows them home. I've been getting calls to all types of homes, including Hogans, to receive a blessing, or sometimes to even enter. There's a lot of stuff out here that we don't talk about, unless we have to. Not because we're scared, but because some of these things, they're better left quiet, better left in the dark, where they belong. I'm from the Appalachia region. We always worked it ourselves, bushwhacking, burning brush, patrolling deer trails. On top of that, I'm always carrying my rifle. Out there, you never know what you might run into. This experience that I'm going to tell you is about some weirdness that we kept running into on our own property. Just strange and creepy overall. Not sure what to think. I was walking one of the deer trails, just doing my rounds as always, when I started hearing this knocking sound. Not a woodpecker, not an axe. It sounded like metal tapping against wood, steady like a pattern, echoing from deep in the holler. It made me stop and actually pay attention to it. Living out here, you get used to the sounds, and when a different sound comes up, it throws you off guard for a bit. I sat there thinking about it, but I loaded my rifle just in case. Didn't fire anything, gun safety and all that. A few minutes later, I heard my father coming through with the tractor. He was mowing all the tall grass, and once that thing gets running, you can't hear much of anything. So I decided I would head back, and also let him know the sound that I heard, and I would also refill my water. The holler on the land splits into a Y shape, both ends leading to a public road, and all of it is fenced off. I took the right, I pushed through the power line cut and stepped out onto the road. I stood there about 15 to 20 minutes, listening, trying to pick up that knocking sound again. Then, I saw some movement. A guy was coming up the exact path that I had just walked down, out of the power line cut, heading towards the road. He was wearing some hippie earth tone clothes, carrying a satchel, and lifting this big bright red bucket over his head, almost like he was protecting it from something. I froze for a second, watching. Then the sound of the tractor finally clicked in my head again, and I realized this wasn't my dad, so I went down the road to intercept him. He popped out over our fence, holding that huge red bucket behind him, almost like a kid that was hiding stolen candy. I remember we talked, but the details are vague. He said something like, "This is Blank Road, right? I'm lost. No cell service." He told me all that stuff, but his story didn't make sense. Hiking uphill, through brush and over 2 sets of barbed wire, when the actual road is easier downhill. I smiled and reminded him that he had crossed into private property. I even pointed out the barbed wire he somehow, quote unquote, didn't see. He looked at my rifle, gave me this stiff, awkward handshake, and he said that he would get out of our way. I warned him about the sinkholes, just to keep him on his feet, and then he turned and walked like he was trying to disappear into the brush. So freaking weird. About a minute later, I heard Dad's tractor in the distance. I went to him, I flagged him down, and I told him everything, what the guy looked like, how he came out of the power line cut, how he was carrying that big red bucket over his head like he was smuggling something. Dad then said, "Go find him and check the bucket." So I went back the same way that I came, down towards the spot where the stranger popped out of the fence line. The guy wasn't nowhere to be seen. He had also abandoned the bucket a little further uphill and was now off making a phone call, trying to act all normal. I opened the bucket and I found this old, rusty metal piss pot. It was full of leaves. It was an old-fashioned chamber pot. I know people sometimes use them as trail markers. Old-timers call them pissing pots, a way to mark where someone's been digging or running lines. Seeing one all packed with leaves, sitting on our land, told me that he had been here long before I walked up on him. So I grabbed it. I rolled it downhill so I could pick it up later, and I was about to leave when the stranger suddenly came back, almost like he was checking to see if I found anything. He apologized, said he was lost, and said he wouldn't cross our fence again. That's when I noticed the little roofer's pickaxe. It was tucked on his belt. I did ask him again what he was doing. He exhaled and said, "I'm digging roots." And that's when it clicked. There's people who pay stupid money for certain plants, which made sense why he was sweating, nervous, and willing to crawl through brush instead of taking the easy road. Once he left again, I went downhill to stash the piss pot somewhere on our side of the fence so I could grab it later. I didn't want him thinking that he could come back for it. And that's when I found the marks. Scratches along the trunks. Long. Could have been a bear, but the space was weird. It could have been him hitting trees with that little pickaxe. There are root diggers who do stupid stuff to break up ground, or mark a path or sections they had already worked, which does make me wonder how long he had been out here. Creepy overall. It just didn't feel right. I made sure the rifle stayed loaded after that. Sometime later, me and my brother were out on the land doing typical redneck stuff, shooting and testing smoke grenades, just messing around. On the way up, we found a random car parked on the left side of that same Y road. It wasn't ours. It was just sitting there. We parked ourselves underneath the tree where the hedge blocks our vehicle from the road. After a moment of, what the hell, we decided to fan out. We made a code word, Jarrow. If one of us spotted someone, we would just shout, Jarrow, and the other would run. If things went bad, we would shoot. Basically, we would use our own judgment. Our dad had taught us this. Let's say that we came across someone, and we were having a conversation. We would say the code word at some point in a sentence. and know that things were gonna turn out bad. I went up the hill, all geared up, AR loaded, plenty of water, extra mags. My brother had a pistol stuffed in his pocket. About 17 minutes into the stakeout, that's when I heard muffled yelling through the trees. "Hey, come down here." I thought it was go time, so I ran downhill, weapon ready and all. And that's when I saw my brother standing beside the car, and a redneck dude was walking towards him looking scared out of his mind. Ball cap, loose shirt. My brother yelled for me to, quote unquote, call the tow truck. We hadn't talked about a tow truck at all, but he was basically trying to put fear in the guy. The redneck denied the car was his, acted nervous, and then he randomly ran off into the woods once we turned our backs for half a second. We ended up calling Dad, even our neighbors, and nobody recognized the car, nor did they have family over or visitors. Then, everything clicked. What if there was more than one person? We started inspecting the car. It was locked. We were about to break the window when a Prius rolled up with two meth heads inside. They begged us not to tow the car. They said the guy we saw was their cousin, and he got scared with all the guns and everything that we had, and that he would be back any minute. They tried to unlock the car but couldn't get in. We then pretended to, quote unquote, cancel the tow, just so that they could leave. They did end up driving off. It was so fucking weird. So we just left it and planned on telling our dad about this, but we still stayed watching from a distance. About an hour later, they came back and tried again, and they still couldn't get it to open. Finally, another man came walking from a distance, coming from the direction where the previous people had came by. Now this guy actually opened the car. He had stuff in his pockets. I know because his pants were sagging, heavy, almost like he had bags of dirt or sand. My brother and I stepped down and ran towards him, pointing our rifles. I was like, "Who the fuck are you? You know you've been trespassing on private property?" He just said, "Yeah." I then asked, "What the fuck are you doing down here?" And he just said, "Hiking." He then closed the door, gave us a look somewhere between anger, and said, "I'm sorry to bother you all. The car had stalled down the road, and I had to get off and ended up here. I went back looking for help, but I couldn't find anybody. My apologies. I'm sorry. It won't happen again." And then he just took off in the car. We ended up calling our dad again and filled him in. He wasn't surprised. He said they were most likely harvesting drugs or moonshiners. Either way, dangerous to mess with, and he told us that next time not to go near anybody. Of course, me and my brother didn't listen, and against our dad's wishes, we geared up again and went down to check the fences. There were too many people showing up lately, too many signs that people were slipping in and out without being seen. We followed the right side of the Y again, climbing slowly through the ridge. The woods felt different. We kept the high ground behind us just in case. At this point, we're checking every little thing that we hadn't noticed before. All debris, anything that didn't look like stormfall or some old logging trash. There were no people this time, just a turkey that we ended up scaring and a whole lot of silence. We pushed deeper, past where we normally go, following the ridge until it broke into a cliff. We scaled down it carefully, boots sliding on loose rock, rifle slung but ready. The air did feel stale down there. We then made it to the far fence line, and that's where we found the first problem. There were sections of the barbed wire cut clean, hook and loop bent so someone could slip through quiet and close it behind them. Apparently someone had built themselves a hidden entrance. We started marking the cut sections with little mine flags, trying to rewire the loop so it would hold. My brother was talking to me when he stopped mid-sentence, and he just stared past me. I turned around, expecting another break in the fence, maybe a stash, maybe tools, but it wasn't none of that. Up in a tree, 10, maybe 12 feet off the ground, there was a fucking deer head, and it was wedged between two branches. It wasn't tied, It wasn't hanging. It was just pressed into the fork like someone had climbed up there and pushed it until it was stuck. The eyes were wide open. Scary as hell. And the weird thing is that there were no drag marks, no blood trail, nothing. Just a random head up in that tree. It was facing the exact direction that we had walked in from. For a minute, we didn't say anything. I think at this point we were both scared. The woods were dead quiet. There were also no birds and no squirrels, no wind. Nothing but that feeling behind your ribs when something isn't right, and your brain is trying to process everything. That's when my brother whispered, "That is not natural." I wanted to say it was poachers, meth heads, some sick person messing around, but the way it was placed, the height, I had never seen anything like this. None of it lined up. We finished wiring the fence back together faster than we should have, checking the posted signs in the creek bank on the way out. Every time that I looked over my shoulder, I was expecting to see something looking at us from up on the ridge. By the time that we made it back to the main trail, and none of us had said more than a handful of words, and we never went that deep again. We thought all the weirdness, the root digger, the trespassers, the fences being cut, it was just people being people. Maybe they were looking for money, hiding stuff in the woods. Now that explanation works out fine. Up until we found that deer head, 12 feet up in a tree like it was placed there for us to see it. When we finally got back home, we told Dad everything that we marked, exactly where we found that deer head. And his reaction was off. He didn't show fear. He didn't get mad or anything. He just got quiet. Then he told us, "Don't ever go back to that part of the ridge. Ever." He didn't even ask anything about it. "No, I'll check tomorrow." His reaction to it seemed like he already knew about it. And ever since that day, he stopped letting us wander off alone. No more patrolling, no more checking the far fence by ourselves. If we went past the white road at all, he would come with us. And even then, he always stayed away from that ridge. He never said why, nor did he explain what he knew, if he did know anything. As the years went by, we started doing a lot more stuff on our own again, but we never went back to that spot. Not since the day that we saw the deer head up in the tree. Whatever was out there, and whatever cut the fence, whatever moved through the woods without leaving tracks, I know it couldn't be a person, a poacher. It wasn't a lost person. They wouldn't be able to get up there. Well, I guess some places out here in Appalachia, you just leave alone. And if someone older tells you not to do something out here, you listen. I was brought back to some really disturbing memories that I had a long time ago. I don't mean this in a way of repressed memory. It was never repressed. It was just a very disturbing thing that happened to myself and some friends on a camping trip. We told people back then, quite a few people, but it's a pretty strange and pretty old story now that I make myself remember it all. Of course, nobody believed us. It was your typical only the people that were there really know what happened. And I have long since fallen out of touch with the people involved. So over the last 20-some years, it had sort of fallen in the back of my brain as a lot of those things do. I spent some time trying to recall everything I can. I'm going on 40 now, and this was back in my college day. So here's my story, and I'm gonna give as many details as I can remember. It was summer of 2001. I can't remember exactly if it was June or July, but it was one of the two. I wasn't taking any summer classes that year, nor was my best friend John. Now John had been my buddy since middle school. We went to a southern college that's known for football and parties. That's the most details that I'm gonna give about that. John and I decided that it would be fun to go camping. The weather that weekend was gonna be pretty cool for summer, so I convinced my not very outdoors girlfriend Lauren into coming along. John and his girlfriend Lisa were on board too. Lauren and I had been going out for almost 2 years by this point, so we were pretty close. John had only been dating Lisa for a month at most, and Lauren and I didn't know her very well. It seemed like they were getting serious already, so we figured that this would be a good chance to get to know each other more. Anyways, John's family is pretty country. They always go fishing and hunting and camping. They also own the boat, a little fiberglass skiff with a center console. We decided it would be pretty cool to take the boat out offshore, because there's a lot of small islands nearby that we could have had to ourselves for the whole weekend. The island that we decided on was known by 2 names. The first is what you'll usually see on charts or maps of the area, and that's Osprey Island. There are most likely 100 Osprey Islands out there, so I'm not too worried about anybody finding out which one I'm talking about. That being said, some of the locals call it the Crab Key, and no, it's not related to the 007 movie. It was part of a small archipelago, but a lot of the other islands were washed away back in the 80s, so Crab Key was a cool little island. It wasn't very big, but it was big enough from one end to the other. You couldn't see the woods to the other side. It was about 2 miles long at the most and only a few hundred feet wide. We loaded up the boat with our tents, sleeping bags, and a couple of coolers. My older brother had bought us some beer, which was pretty exciting at that time, and other necessities. We set out Friday afternoon. Crab Key isn't far offshore, so we got there with plenty of daylight left. We just ran the skiff up on the sand. It was high tide, and since the boat was pretty light, we could push it out into the surf easily. John tossed the anchor out on the beach anyway, just to be safe. John and I had been to the island a few times before, always during the day. We would just explore around the shore a bit and fish, so we knew to pull the boat up near this trail that led to the palmettos. We grabbed the gear and started hiking. Like I said, the island isn't very thick, so it was only about 1/3 of a mile or so from where we had beached to the spot we were planning on setting up camp. Now, in hindsight, I really regret the spot that we decided to post up at, but at that time we didn't think twice about it. You see, the island had been occupied a long time ago by Native Americans. I can't tell you the name of the tribe, that's not what I studied in school, but there were actually quite a lot of Indian tribes throughout the southeastern US in the past, and a lot of them lived on the coast. One of the most common features they left behind are so-called oyster mounds. Basically, it's exactly what it sounds like. They used to eat a lot of oysters, and these oysters have shells. When the Indians lived in one place for a long time, they would make a huge pile of the oyster shells, so that's what people had found in the middle of Crab Key. The mound wasn't big. I suspect that the tribe had lived on the island, but most likely didn't live there full time. Like I said, it wasn't far offshore, so it might have been a seasonal settlement. Anyways, the mound was about 7 feet high and big enough that the 4 of us, holding hands, only got maybe 1/4 of the way around the perimeter. It was the center of a clearing, and it seemed like a cool place to camp, so that's where we ended up setting up. Like I said, I didn't know much about the Indians that made the mound. According to the older kids I knew, like our elder siblings back in the old days, when they were young, you could still sometimes find neat little artifacts in Crab Key. Most of the time like little arrowheads or pottery shards. But apparently, so many generations of teens had gone out to the island to drink or screw everything up. I know we never saw any relics other than the shells. We basically set up camp right next to the mound. John and I each had our own little dome tent, so it was essentially just 2 tents around a fire pit that we dug in. It was early summer dusk, maybe around 8 o'clock, when we finished our preparations. We had a big pile of fallen pine and a fire going. We had the tents up, and John and Lisa had already popped a couple of Bud Lights. We were just about to settle in for a night of underage drinking, when Lauren realized that she had left her inhaler on the boat. Do keep in mind that Lauren had pretty bad asthma. It wasn't bad pollen season at least, but she still didn't like to screw around. especially on an island a good 3 hours away from any hospital. So we had to make sure that her little rescue thing was handy. I told her that I would go get it, but she insisted that she wanted to tag along. I was fine with that, as I figured it would give us some alone time. So we set off down the trail to the shore. It took about less than 10 minutes to stroll from the campsite back to the shore. We grabbed it from the console in the boat, along with her cell phone. None of us had a signal, and it was a very old cell phone. But whatever, I did try to put some moves down and get something going, but I didn't get any further than second base, before suddenly she said that she was feeling creeped out, and wanted to go back to camp. I sighed, and accepted. Like I said, she was not an outdoors kind of girl. It was getting close to dark, and it was very quiet out there except for a few bugs, and the lapping of the waves. We got halfway back, right at the point where we couldn't see the shore or camp. It was pretty dark under the trees. All of a sudden, Lauren stops and turns around. Her face is all scrunched up, and just as she opens her mouth to talk, the smell hits me too. Now, I have read all the Goatman stuff and all the stories like that, and it's always described as a weird copper smell, but this wasn't anything close to that. A lot of times, it's hard to describe a weird smell, but this one was pretty clear. It was a distinct body odor. It was as if that one kid that we all knew in school who never showered, or didn't understand what deodorant was.
What the hell is that?
I'm trying to calm down my own breathing. I look around and say, it must be something dead in the bushes. She then says,
Why didn't we smell this when we came by the last couple of times?
I shrugged and pulled my shirt collar up over my nose. She also did the same. I then said, do you want to go look for it? It might be a deer or something. They do swim out to the island sometimes. Lauren then shook her head. She says,
Screw that. Let's just get back to the camp.
She then started jogging towards the camp, and I began to follow. Suddenly, there was some sort of rustling noise coming far from the trail. We both froze, staring towards the shaking plants. Whatever it was quick and retreating, and the sound faded into the brush.
What the hell was that?
Lauren said, It's probably eating something, whatever it is that we're smelling. A possum or something. We stood there for a few seconds, trying to figure out what it was, and then, without saying anything else, we resumed our jog back to camp. After a few minutes, we ran to the bend on the trail and entered a clearing. John was standing by the campfire with his arms up, yelling, Where the hell y'all been at? We were both trying to catch our breath since we jogged back. Where the hell were you guys? He said again. We were taken aback by how agitated he seemed.
What's your problem?
Lauren said. John looked at both of us for a second, wondering why we were both sweaty and assuming that we were doing something else. Then he turned back in the direction that he had been facing a moment ago. I don't know where Lisa went. She said that she needed a pee right after you guys left. He then started taking half steps in a circle, looking out into the now dark woods. It's been half an hour by now. Didn't you guys hear me yelling out for you all? I hadn't even thought of it until just now writing this, but we hadn't. We didn't hear anybody shouting anything at the time, and the island is small enough that you could hear somebody really shouting from anywhere. So that's definitely something weird that I hadn't realized at that time. Anyways, I asked John why he hadn't gone looking for her, and he just shrugged. By now, I had gotten over the creeps of the event back on the trail, so I suggested that Lauren stay in camp, and I would go with John to find Lisa. It was only a little spit of sand and we could search the whole place by midnight if we had to. Lucky for us, we didn't have to. We barely left camp in the direction that Lisa had left in when we spotted her. The white t-shirt that she was wearing was easily seen in the dark. She was standing next to a palmetto, but she was also facing away from us towards the opposite shore. John called out to her, but she didn't respond. I called out to her, and nothing. We started walking towards her, calling out to her, but she wouldn't respond. She was just standing there, with her back to us. John and I exchanged looks. We were freaked out, and then we waited. He said her name once more softly before slowly reaching towards her. She jolted and spun around, breathing really hard. John jumped backwards.
John,
She seemed to be surprised.
What the hell? You scared the crap out of me.
We've been calling your name for 30 minutes, and you're standing out here in the dark like a freak, and we scared you? She raised her eyebrows, confused, and shook her head.
I did not. I just came out here to pee.
She looked down. It was only barely noticeable in the dark, but there was an obvious wet stain in her khaki shorts. She stuttered, putting her hands over her mouth. She had peed herself. We all stood there stunned for a few seconds, and then John snapped 2 cents and walked back to her, hugging her. Hey, I don't know what happened, but it's not a big deal. Lisa was speechless. So was I. It was the weirdest thing I ever seen. I started thinking to myself that maybe she had a seizure or something. Meanwhile, Lisa starts crying softly into John's shoulder, and he turns to look at me with his go back to camp while I take care of this look. So I did just that. I only had about 2 minutes to explain to Lauren what happened before they appeared at the edge of the light from the campfire. Lisa was looking at her feet. Her face was still deeply red. But John, without a word, went into their tent and came back out a moment later with some fresh clothes for her. She then went to the other side of the oyster mound, and when she came back, she was wearing some jean shorts and a yellow tank top. I guess she had thrown everything else that she was wearing out into the woods, because she didn't have any of her old clothes anymore. The 3 of us had taken seats around the campfire. All of us were silent, and then she joined us. It took some time, but after we had a few beers, things started to lighten back up again. The mood turned out to be fun. We all got a buzz on, and the rest of the night was what we were hoping for. Jokes, making out, and a lot of bullshitting. I was awoken by John shouting my name. I jerked upright from the deep black sleep of the drunken hangover, gasping for breath the way a drowning man does when pulled above water. John had unzipped our tent and was yelling at me from the entry. Lauren was next to me in the sleeping bag, telling John to shut up. I couldn't even get a word out through my dry mouth, so I waved him off while nodding, trying to signal that I was getting up. John backed off, finally quiet. I put on a shirt and climbed out of the tent into the humid morning air. John was pacing around the blackened remains of our campfire. He came towards me as soon as I was out of the tent. Dude, Lisa is fucking gone again. Nothing was making sense to me yet. I yawned and stretched. Lisa is gone when I woke up. She wasn't there. I had been shouting the whole time. How the hell did you not wake up? I shrugged, still not fully invested in the conversation. I'm not sure what's going on. I do remember saying something half intelligent like, what's her problem? John had already turned around and started into the brush. Come on, dude. We gotta find her. I hesitated for a second and then turned to poke my head back into the tent. I doubt Lauren even heard me, but I told her I was gonna help John find Lisa. She just murmured something in her sleep. It took me a minute to catch up with John, who was moving at a pretty quick pace through the underbrush, yelling for Lisa. I didn't even try to talk when I caught up. I just followed along, looking around us. The island was pretty wide open, nothing but straight trunk pine trees and low scrub, so you can see a pretty long way. It wasn't some twisty narrow old growth forest. Lisa, John was shouting. It seemed pretty silly when I think about it. Like I said, the island was so small that a person standing at one end could likely hear a loud cry from the other end without a problem. How does this girl keep getting lost? John was saying, and I was worried that she most likely had another seizure or some sort of episode, that she could seriously be hurt out there somewhere. This went on for about an hour. We reached one shore, followed it to the tip of the island, and then come back into the woods and follow an overgrown trail all the way back to the fire tip. It was on that far end of the island that we made our first unpleasant discovery. At the fringe of the underbrush, right where it meets the sand of the beach, we found some huge flattened foliage, as if something big had rolled around here to make a bed. But all of the green brush was covered in a spray of tacky reddish-brown blood. There was no doubt about what it was. John and I had both hunted a lot, but there was no doubt that something big had been completely mutilated here. But there was nothing but the tacky spray of blood. No fur, no bones, no half-eaten carcass. We both were thinking the same thing, but none of us could think of anything to say. I'm sure his brain was running the same routine as mine. trying to rationalize it. There's a bobcat or something out here. Sure, there's one of them on this tiny island who eats deer and doesn't leave a scrap of bone. By the way, the air smelled awful. It was already hot, much more hot than the weather report had predicted, and the smell was exactly what you would expect from one of those Goatman stories. But there was no mystical reason for it. No question. The coppery smell of blood. John then gulped down a gag from next to me, so we left. There was no reason to stay. We went back through the woods past the gore-covered matted clearing back towards the camp. John then started getting anxious, and I grew more and more annoyed. I'm not gonna say I wasn't worried. I was. I was really worried about Lisa, but I barely even knew her. And in the past 12 hours, she had mysteriously disappeared twice and was screwing up what was supposed to be a fun weekend. To top it off, she was really freaking me the hell out. So we get back to camp, and guess what we see? I'm sure you already know. Lisa and Lauren are sitting next to the campfire, which is burning again, cooking up some bacon from the cooler. I sighed and said something profane under my breath, but John loses it. He runs into the clearing, like a madman, yelling at Lisa, "Where the hell have you been? We've been shouting for you all morning." Lisa and Lauren look stunned. Lisa just stares at him, silent, eyes wide, but then Lauren jumps up and starts giving it right back.
Why don't you just settle down and quit being a bitch? We haven't heard you shouting anything. Why don't you just relax?
About halfway through her counter assault, she starts looking at me like I had something to do with this, so I'll walk up and put a hand on John's shoulder and give him the kind of quick, calm down lecture that only a close friend can give. Afterwards, he shuts up and sits down next to Lisa. "Sorry, y'all." Lisa nods, so we all sit around the campfire for a bit. We eat some bacon except for Lisa, who takes her share and just stares at it some more. Just a whole awkward silence. Then Lauren grabs my shoulder and gives me a...
Hey, let's go somewhere private.
We make our excuse to John and Lisa, and we head into the woods on the far side of the oyster mound. We get a few hundred yards down the trail when Lauren spins around to face me.
What the hell is up with them?
She says, "I'm not ready," and just throw out my hands in a, I don't know what's going on with them.
First, she disappears last night. Then you guys disappear this morning, and she hasn't said a word since I got her out of the tent.
I'm just shaking my head at this point, having no idea what's going on. Hold on, John woke me up because Lisa was missing this morning, and we just spent the last couple of hours going all around trying to find her. And then we find you guys making breakfast like nothing ever happened. Now it was Lauren's turn to look confused for a second.
I got up after you left and she was in the tent. I woke her up, got the fire going, and we've been sitting there awkward as hell because she won't say anything.
And then we looked at each other for a long moment. "This is really messed up," I said after a long silence. She nodded, digesting her own thoughts.
I want to go home,
Lauren said. Part of me wanted to disagree, wanted to be a man and chalk it all up to the silliness and get our weekend back on track. But all I did was nod. "Alright," I said. We headed back to camp. John and Lisa are sitting right where we left them, still silent. For some reason, I feel like I need to explain to John what Lauren and I have been talking about. So I asked John if he could come down to the boat with me to get some stuff we left there. John agrees, and we head off. 10 minutes later, we're standing by the boat, which is resting completely on the damp low tide shore, a good 10 feet from the shallow landing water. "So John, look man, Lauren and I think that we should leave as soon as we can." "Huh?" John responds. "How come?" "Why does your girlfriend keep disappearing?" John started shaking his head. "F you man, that's not cool." I then said, "Look, I don't know what happened last night, but I'm thinking that she's having some sort of mental episodes or something. I'm not sure, but it doesn't matter." We stared at each other for a few seconds. Lauren said that Lisa was inside your tent after we left. "Are you sure she was? You know, gone?" Trying to make sense of the situation. "Are you kidding? I think I can tell if there's a second person in my effing tent, dude." Lauren just said after we left she got up, and Lisa was sleeping inside her tent. I don't know what's going on, but I agree with Lauren that we should just call this a weekend and go back. John was shaking his head. trying to figure out what he wanted to say, when I saw his eyes focus on something behind me and widen. I turned and immediately saw what had caught his attention. The plastic housing had been yanked off of the outboard motor on the boat. The clips that held it in place had been snapped off. The motor had been brutalized, vandalized, really. The spark plug wires were yanked out, ripped, and torn apart from the plug heads. Much of the other wiring was ripped to pieces. The prop was completely gone, as well as the pin. It took a few seconds to sink in just how screwed we suddenly were. At the same time, we both said, "What the fuck?" before either of us had a chance to fully process what we were looking at. A piercing scream that echoed out in the woods behind us, coming from the camp. Without a thought, we took off down the trail in a dead sprint. We found Lauren sitting in the middle of the trail, 100 feet or so from the bend that entered the clearing. She was on her knees, knuckles in her mouth, hyperventilating. She looked at us as we ran up to her, eyes confused and panicked. I fell to my own knees next to her, putting my hands on her shoulders. I shook her and called her name. She blinked a few times, her eyes seeming to focus. I then said, "What is it? What is it?" She just shook her head and pointed. Right next to the edge of the trail were a pair of jean shorts and a yellow tank top, and they were stained dark red. "What the fuck?" John said, moving towards them for a closer look. Lauren then said,
I was coming out to use the bathroom.
she said to my ear,
I was coming back to camp.
and she just started crying. "What are you guys doing? What's going on, dude?" John said from behind me. "This belongs to Lisa." We stared at each other. None of us could think of anything to say.
I want to go home.
I promised her that we would go soon, but we had to pack up. She looked very unhappy, but nodded. I helped her back to her feet, and we tromped through the pine needles back to camp. I actually didn't have the heart to tell her about the boat. We get back to camp, and Lisa is just sitting calm by the dead campfire. John then runs over to her, almost as if he's surprised to see her still in one piece, and takes her into his arms and starts whispering into her ear. Lauren and I can see from his face that he's going to pieces, but he seems to be doing his best, most likely to comfort and get through Lisa. We are both just glad that she is, in fact, in one piece. We stand awkwardly at the edge of camp for a bit, watching John whisper reassurances to Lisa. Eventually, I decide that I need to fill Lauren on the boat situation, so I lead her a bit away and tell her what we seen. I was expecting a level of freaking out, but she actually took it more calm than me or John. She said, as a matter of fact,
It must have been an animal. Raccoons tear stuff up all the time.
there was no questioning in her voice. I then nodded. "You're most likely right." It only took a second to convince myself it was most likely a raccoon. Keep in mind, I had in fact experienced many raccoon issues many times in my life, and they can actually cause some pretty serious damage if they want to get in or out of something. It wasn't hard to make me believe it. I debated with myself whether to tell Lauren about the bloody mess that we had also found, but decided that she was taking things way too well, and that there was no reason to screw that up. So we spent a few minutes talking about strategies to get home. She asked if John and I could fix the boat. I said, most likely not. She asked if we could swim to shore. I said, maybe, if we were desperate. She checked her phone for signal. Of course it didn't have any. We were still brainstorming options. None of them were already planned out. When John found us, he said, "Guys, I'm worried about Lisa. That got both of our attention. She won't say anything," he said. He was looking at the ground. "I don't know what to do." Lauren nodded.
She wouldn't talk to me this morning. I'm worried too. Maybe she really did have some kind of seizure or something. Has she ever said anything about like medical stuff or anything like that?
Lauren sounded almost hopeful for an answer that made sense. "No, she hasn't," said John, shaking his head. "I mean, nothing like this. I don't know what to do." We spent some time in a little circle talking about our escape plan, but there was nothing really great that came to mind. Again, the island wasn't terribly far from shore. John and I were strong swimmers. If we got really desperate, we could make it. The water was very shallow in places, and full of sharp as hell oyster bars and potentially swarming with bull sharks. So that was an option that we weren't freaked out enough to really use yet. It was maybe around 11 o'clock, maybe closer to noon. It was hot as hell, tons of biting flies, and no sense of fun. Nobody wanted to go swimming to cool off. Nobody wanted to tell jokes. It was just the three of us trying to make stiff conversation, while Little Miss Sunshine was sitting there dead silent. There were a few moments when Lisa would look up at one of us suddenly and just stare, but mostly she just kept her eyes locked dead on the fire. Imagine that, camping with a group of friends, and one of them is just staring directly at a fire, not saying a word, for hours. At one point, John left to go work on the boat. I was gonna go too, but Lauren made it clear that she didn't want to be alone there. There was no reason to point out that she wasn't alone. She would be with Lisa, but it didn't need to be said. John was gone for an hour or two, and he came back looking pretty rejected. I knew that was coming. The motor was trashed, so the afternoon passed by with the three of us basically just trying to figure out what to do. I mean, looking back, I'm thinking the same thing anybody else is reading this. Why aren't you guys building a raft, making shelter, tying up Lisa so that she doesn't disappear again? I know, but we were young, and again, nothing really outright crazy was going on when you think about it. We were somewhere in between calm and panic. The twilight starts to come on, and we spent the entire day doing basically nothing. At one point, Lauren and I went and gathered more firewood, so we were set for the night around 6 o'clock. John led Lisa by the hands to the tent and laid her down. I remember looking at her through the round door just before John zipped it up. She was laying on her back like a dead person, except she had her eyes wide open, staring at the roof of the tent, very stiff. With Lisa in the tent, we started talking normally again. We got the fire going, and as twilight was coming on, we popped a few more beers and, at least for a little bit, forgot about the obvious problems and started having some fun. I mean, the boat was weird, but it was probably just a raccoon. We were easily within reach of land if it came to that, and it probably wouldn't because there were usually a lot of local traffic around the bay, checking crab traps or fishing or even just coming to the island to hang out. As for the blood, I convinced myself it was just some sort of animal, maybe a bobcat, right? And Lisa, even though she's been acting weird as shit, she was most likely asleep in the tent and not actively bringing us down. This whole good moment lasted well until full past dark. I don't know what time exactly, but it had been dark a while. John gets up to go use the bathroom. He was only gone a few paces before he stopped. "Guys," I remember he said. Lauren and I turned around, both mid-laugh. The smiles drained from our faces like something you would see in a movie. Guys? The door to John's tent was unzipped wide open. The tent was empty.
You've got to be fucking kidding me,
Lauren said. We both got up instantly. John was in his tent looking for a flashlight. A moment later, I was in my backpack grabbing the battery lanterns that I had brought. I handed one to Lauren, who hesitated a few seconds to grab it. She obviously knew what it meant, and she didn't like it. "We gotta go find her," I said. Lauren just stared at me wide-eyed and shook her head. "How the hell did she unzip the tent and leave without any of us noticing?" John said. His voice sounded urgent. He was shining his mag light in random directions, the white light cutting through the dark woods. "Alright, we're gonna split up," he said. Fuck that," I said. That was my instant reply. "I don't know if you ever seen a scary movie before, John, but there's no way I'm gonna leave Lauren alone, or you alone, and there's no way I'm going out there alone either." My speech was definitely not that sane. So John formed up with us, and as a small triangle of bodies and flashlights, we set out down the weedy trail that started nearest to the tent. We searched for a while, with all of our arms pretty much leaned, eyes facing every direction. We had grown up on Scooby-Doo, and we weren't gonna let anybody fall through a trap door or any kind of reversible bookshelf or anything. When we first left camp, we were shouting Lisa's name, but after 10 minutes, we just gave up. She would have heard us by now, but she wasn't answering, so we just started searching in silence. waiting for that one moment in a scary movie when the cat is sleeping out of the closet while the guy with the hatchet is under the bed. Anyways, we worked our way around pretty much the entire island. If it was hypothetically midnight when we started looking, it was most likely 3 or 4 in the morning. I could tell from the sky that dawn was a while off. We then realized that we came around to the boat. Lauren breaks from the group for a bit and goes over to the boat. John and I, who are still peering into the woods, hear her gasp. We both look back. Our nerves were pretty raw. And Lauren's gasp is the first human noise that we heard in 2 hours. She raises an arm to shield her eyes from the flashlight beams that we leveled on her. Then she points towards the boat. "No fucking way," John groaned. The fiberglass had all been scratched with deep gouges and shadow lines etched into every surface of the boat. The cushions of the seats were shredded. Fiber padding was everywhere. We ran the lights over the exterior of it, looking at the deep marks in the material. It seemed like there were almost patterns in there, but they weren't patterns. I wish I could say something really spooky, like there were cave drawings of 666, or some kind of skulls or crossbones or something, but it wasn't. It was just like a 3-year-old scribbling in a coloring book. And then we also noticed a broken oyster shell spread around the boat. It was somewhere between low and high tide, so water was lapping at the stern of the boat. In the damp sand were dozens of broken shells, many with curls of plastic and fiberglass stuck to the sharp tips. I remember Lauren then started crying. I put my arm around her and pulled her close. I remember her face turning red, her eyes pink, tears pooling and running down her cheeks. John wasn't doing any better. He had returned his flashlight beam to the woods and was whipping it around without any purpose. Panic was obvious. I was still sitting in it too, but I guess I was just in a slightly better headspace than my friends. That's when John screamed, and then Lauren screamed. John's flashlight beam had stopped, and it was illuminating Lisa. She was on the edge of the trees, her face pale, her hair messy and tangled, pine straw and twigs all through it. In response to John and Lauren's screams, Lisa began screaming as well. I don't know how the hell I was able to hold it together, but I recall thinking something kind of silly like, well, at least she's talking again. I know this might sound like a funny scene, especially because John and Lauren started screaming, and then creepy as hell Lisa started screaming too, and then they were all screaming. I started shaking Lauren by her shoulders. She dropped her lantern to the ground. John had gotten himself under control, as had Lisa, apparently, because next thing you know, it was silent. The only sound was the lapping of waves hitting against the shore. At this point, I want to make another comment. I can't believe we didn't think about it then, but I also realized my mind wasn't exactly functioning in a logical way. Maybe John or Lauren noticed it, but they never mentioned it to me. Lisa was at this point wearing the same khaki shorts and the same white t-shirt that she was wearing when we first arrived. The actual shorts that she had peed herself in. The outfit that she changed out of the very first night. Only now, looking back, do I realize that she had been wearing that when John and I first came back from the boat. The bloody clothes that we found on the trail. Those were the clothes that she changed into the first night in the woods. I know this might sound kind of confusing, but some of this just now seems so obvious to me. But now, Lisa starts gasping and crying, and then she starts sobbing. John then runs over to her and wraps her arm around her. She does the same. They're wrapped in each other's embrace. How romantic. Lisa then starts saying,
"What's happening?"
Lauren and I turn to face each other, both speechless, when from the woods nearly rips this loud screeching sound. John and I are both pretty woodsy. John more than I, but we're both campers, and we're both hikers. He hunts with his family a lot, and we were both stricken with fear by this sound. The sound that we never heard before. I can't even really describe it, but I'll try. It sounds like if you ever heard raccoons mating, they make this wild high-pitched sort of screech. So combine that with the fake sounds of Bigfoot groans that you see from those awful Animal Planet specials, and maybe like the sound of the T-Rex from Jurassic Park, and you can kind of imagine this type of sound that I'm talking about. I know it's not really accurate, but it's the best that I can do. The 4 of us freeze. John and I, the only 2 still holding flashlights, spin to face the sound, but there's nothing there. I then hear Lauren say,
Oh God.
From beside me, the screech comes again, this time closer. John, who's holding Lisa by the shoulder, starts to back up towards Lauren and me. We are closer to the boat. I then hear John saying something under his breath. Finally, the screech comes again, and this time, it was close. There's a crazy commotion from the underbrush. Something is definitely coming towards us now, and it's coming fast. John then turns around, holding Lisa by her shoulder, and then starts to run, trying to close the 50-odd feet between us. Me and Lauren do the same, and we start running for the boat. Now, I have no idea why we all decided to run for the boat. The motor was dead as dirt, but hey, we weren't really thinking in that moment. So I'm basically throwing Lauren into the boat when I hear the muffled scuff of something hitting beach sand. I turn and see that John and Lisa have fallen onto the beach. John's flashlight has tumbled away from him. At the same time, Lauren slips onto the wet fiberglass of the boat and falls down, taking my flashlight with her. This is the point that I still find hard to believe or remember, but I'm gonna type out the first things that come to mind and trust to be accurate as possible. I'm looking at the vague dark forms of John and Lisa laying on the ground, maybe 20 feet away from the boat. The moon is pretty dark, maybe a quarter moon. From the brush and scrub emerges this shape. It's human, but not right. It's hard to describe, except, well, Lauren and I saw a movie a year later that really helped. I remember when it appeared on screen for the first time. It brought flashbacks and Lauren and I simply stood up and left. It was actually one of the last times that Lauren and I saw each other. The movie was Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers, and of course, the character was Gollum. The shape was, like I said, humanoid. It almost shimmered in the faint moonlight. It padded across, four-legged like an animal, but very awkward. I looked with wide eyes as it beelined for John's falling flashlight. It leaped upon it like a cat on a bird, and it began working on it, grasping it and beating it into the shore again and again. This all happened in the blink of an eye. John, staring at this occurring only a few feet from where he was laying, was able to pull himself together and drag Lisa back up, half running, half crawling to the boat. I helped him toss Lisa in, and together we began pushing, trying to get back into the deeper water. I didn't look back at whatever was happening on the shore, but this thing was squealing now. I could still hear the thumping of the light hitting the dense wet sand, and there was the light itself. Of course, the beam of light was slicing up and down towards us, illuminating the boat, and then up into the sky and then back down. Then, nothing. It went dark, and immediately the sound stopped. John and I had succeeded in getting the entire boat back into the water, but it was still very shallow. Our feet were wet, but the water wasn't even up to our ankles. The girls were now screaming from where they were laying on the boat, and then the thing screamed from behind us as well. It was terrifying before from the woods, but it was far worse when the thing was screeching down the backs of our shirts. I turned to look, and what I saw, well, I won't have any trouble remembering. I don't even need any help to describe it. It looked like a silverback gorilla, not so thick, but the same pose. It rested with its legs hunched low, two stringy muscular arms beating the sand around it in a rage. I couldn't really see the face. It was dark, but I was struck by a sense of humanity. There were two eyes, there was a nose, and there was a mouth. Everything was so distorted. Anyways, it screeched again, and it seemed ready to charge at us. What I did next was purely a reflex. I reached down into the boat and yanked from beneath the body of my terrified girlfriend the lantern that she had pulled from my hands. At that time, I meant to throw it at that thing, but I missed, and I missed bad. The lantern went past its shoulder and landed with a puff on the sand at the edge of the beach. This thing, it sniffed the air, then it turned, and just like that, it went after the light. John and I couldn't move for a few moments, but the urgency of the moment took over again. We both started shoving the boat again. Finally, there was a squeak, and the boat was free of the sand. We pushed more, forcing it into the deep water. Then we both climbed in and turned and watched. We could still see the movement of the lantern, just a beam of light being pounded against the sand. Occasionally, we would hear a squeal or a groan from the thing on the beach. Finally, after 30 or 40 seconds, The light flickered and went black. Then, there was silence. The only sound was the lapping of water against the side of the boat. Lucky for us, the current was taking us away from the island. We drifted for a few hours before the sun started to come up. By then, we were close enough to the mainland to entertain the idea of swimming in. However, Lisa was pretty much out of it. She was talking and crying, but nobody thought it was a good idea to put her in the water, so we waited. Eventually, we drifted near another boat, a fishing boat out with a client. We made up some story to him. I'm sure he just assumed that we were some dumb drunk kids who got lost and almost died of a heat stroke. Either way, he told us in. And that's basically the whole story. Like I said, we told plenty of people. It was in some great secret among us. Not one person ever believed us. Lisa and John broke up almost instantly. They didn't even really break up. John just never saw or spoke to her ever again. Lauren and I lasted a little longer. We just stopped talking about the event one day, until that night at the movies. I drove her home. We talked a few times on the phone, but we never saw each other again. And then years go by, decades, and some stupid stories on the internet stir all of this back up. Even just sitting here after I typed all this out, I keep telling myself that this sounds crazy, like it was just some cracked out homeless bum, or an island person, or a hermit. There were even times when I hoped that the whole thing was my older siblings playing some kind of prank, but it wasn't. This whole thing really did happen. None of us really ever spoke to Lisa again, as far as I know. Anyways, after Lauren and I split up, we never had contact. She transferred to a school in California. John's story is even more sad. He sort of dropped out right after all this happened. He never went back to school in the fall. We hung out every now and then, but slowly he just stopped returning phone calls and emails. Eventually, he just fell off the radar. The last thing I heard from him was from his mom. A few years after all this happened, he just moved out and didn't leave any contact information. Ever since then, in the modern age of the internet, I sometimes look for him now and then on Facebook or LinkedIn, Twitter, things like that, but I never seen any sign of him. I do worry about my friend though, and I'm still not sure what even happened back there. I'll be the first to say that all of this could have just been going on in my head. The mind is a whole different thing, and it can actually play some pretty trippy tricks on you. Whenever I was scared as a kid, my dad always told me that in life, you shouldn't be scared of a ghost or some other paranormal things. If anything, he said to fear the living, because they can actually hurt you. When I was a teenager, I came into some money after my father committed suicide, and I basically received everything from him. At the time of my dad's passing, he and my mom owned a cabin up in Oregon. The cabin had been put up for sale since my mom could no longer afford the payments, and renting it out was not covering the payments. The cabin was set to go on the market for sale in less than a month, and it was in the process of finalizing the paperwork with all the parties. So during that time, the cabin was not going to be rented out any longer, and it was actually going to be vacant. I saw this as a chance to get away and clear my head in light of all the things going on. I actually quit work. I packed up my snowboarding gear, grabbed my dog midnight, and headed up in my dad's car to the cabin. This was our family cabin that my parents would actually rent out throughout the year when nobody was using it. I had keys to the cabin, and I also had the code for the alarm, so I didn't feel the need to stop at the rental management company and tell them about my stay. This has nothing to do with the coming story, but I feel like I needed to mention it anyway. My first 2 days at the cabin were normal, and nothing really happened. I spent my days playing with my dog in the snow, snowboarding, and the evenings playing PlayStation or listening to music, drinking and smoking out in the balcony. I had already stocked up on food, cigarettes, and liquor, so I was pretty much locked down in the cabin from the occasional out to hit the slopes. With my dog as company and my PlayStation as entertainment, I was quite satisfied and started to feel relaxed. The cabin itself was 2 stories. The bottom story had the living room and a guest bedroom on the side along with a small kitchen. Upstairs were the other 2 rooms along with a walkout balcony that was attached to the master bedroom. Most of my time there was spent in the living room, the kitchen, or the master bedroom. I never ventured into the other rooms and always kept the doors leading into them shut. Open doors to dark rooms always creep me out, by the way. Anyways, the 3rd day came around, and I was going through my usual routine of playing with my dog. His name was Midnight, by the way, and he's passed since then, so I was just playing games and watching movies. On that day, it was pretty heavy snowfall, so I did not feel like trekking down the hill to the main road. That's when things started getting a bit weird. In our area, there were only 2 other cabins around, maybe a block away from each other. Every other cabin aside from these 2 were around a mile away from ours. Surrounding us was mostly forest and very tall pine trees. Yes, they were tall, and this is actually important for the story. Most of these cabins were empty, and from the past couple of days, I knew that no one was currently staying there. So enough background, I'm gonna jump to the weirdness. Around midday, I was outside with my dog when I noticed what looked like footprints in the snow. They were around the area surrounding our cabin. It was still snowing, so the footprints looked sort of fresh, like if someone had been there in the last 20 to 30 minutes before me. I thought that maybe somebody was staying in the cabin near me, and maybe I didn't notice. Maybe they were shut-ins like me. Alright, whatever. The footprints led away from my cabin, and they disappeared in the snow towards the denser part of the trees. I ignored the footprints and went back inside. When the nighttime came around, I decided to head to bed. My dog Midnight was laying on the bed with me when I noticed his ears perk up. This was followed by him quickly jumping off the bed and running downstairs. I laid in bed and stayed silent. I was kind of freaked out, I'm not gonna lie. I could hear him moving around downstairs back and forth. After around 5 minutes, he ran back upstairs to me and started to do his doggy dance for the sign that he had to go pee, or that he wanted to just go outside. Well, fine. I can't say no to him, so we both went downstairs to the outside driveway for him to do his thing. Except, he didn't want to pee. As soon as we were outside, he started to pull, trying to drag me to where he wanted to go. He kept looking into the dense part of the trees where the prints had been earlier, but he also kept sniffing the side of the house and looking up towards the roof. After he figured out that I wasn't going to go to where he wanted, he sat himself down and just stared into the darkness. A bit strange for him, but alright. Maybe there's forest animals out there that he wants to chase down. But fuck this. I didn't want to chance anything. So I pulled him back inside and we both headed back upstairs. Around half an hour later, I was lying in bed when I heard what sounded like hoofs walking on my roof. It was only a series of around 6 steps, and I told myself it could have been a pine cone falling from a tree onto the roof, or maybe a kind of hearted forest animal running around. But here's the thing. The steps seemed to be spaced apart, like that of a man. Well, a person. So it was really freaking me out. Midnight also heard the noise and was quick to run to the balcony screen door, expecting for me to let him out. Alright, you know what? I'm a tough guy, and at that time I considered myself to be fairly well built and strong enough to handle myself. So I grabbed my coat and shoes along with my cigarettes and flashlight and went out into the balcony. Fuck it. As soon as I was outside, I lit up my cigarette and started looking to the roof with my light. Nothing there. And the snow on top of it was undisturbed. Weird. It must have been all in my head. But what about Midnight hearing the noise? Maybe he was feeding off my fear. I started to calm down and relax again. By the way, I'm literally shaking right now, and my heart is beating fast as I'm remembering all of this. My eyes started to adjust to the darkness, and I kept smoking and just staring at the stars and trees next to our cabin. That's when I saw it. In a tree that was a little taller than our cabin, and around 20 feet from the balcony, I saw what looked like a man. He was crouching down in a squatting position in between 2 branches. It looked really tall, like 8 or 9 foot, and it was really fucking skinny. It was squatted on one branch, and it was very long. Wide arms were extended above its head, holding onto the branch above it. while its mouth was wide open with no expression. Fuck me. I wasn't sure if I was really seeing this thing, and I stood there just staring and sat there motionless. I noticed Midnight stand up, and he started pacing behind me, and also lightly barking at the same time. This thing still didn't move. I put my cigarette out and was debating on shining the light in the thing's direction, but something in my head kept screaming not to. So I just walked backwards to the inside of the room, and I pulled Midnight inside with me. Once inside, I locked the door and shined the light in the thing's direction, but there was nothing there. I shut the curtains to the screen door and retreated back to bed, but later on in the night, I heard some light tapping at the screen door, like someone was tapping on the glass with their fingers. It was consistent, and it didn't stop for nearly an hour. Midnight seemed to stare at the door, but he wouldn't go near it. The weirdest thing out of all of this is that I had a feeling like someone was inviting me to open the door, but at the same time, I kept hearing my dad's voice in my head telling me to stay in bed and not do it. I decided to listen to my dad's voice and just stay where I was. I passed out eventually and woke up in the morning. It didn't take me long to pack everything and get the fuck out of there. About 5 years ago, I lived in downtown in a major city in the US. I always been a night person. I would often find myself bored after my roommate, who was actually not a night person, went to sleep. To pass time, I used to go for long walks and spend the time thinking. I spent 4 years like that, walking alone at night. I never once had a reason to feel afraid. I always used to joke with my roommate that even the drug dealers in the city were polite. But all of that changed in just a few minutes of this one night. It was Wednesday, somewhere between 1 and 2 in the morning, and I was walking near a police patrol park quite a ways from my apartment. It was a quiet night, even for a weeknight, with very little traffic and almost no one on foot. The park, as it was most nights, was empty. I turned down a short side street in order to loop back to my apartment when I first noticed him. At the far end of the street, on my side, was the silhouette of a man, dancing. It was a strange dance, similar to a waltz, but he would finish the box with an odd stride. I guess you could say he was dance walking, and he was headed straight for me. Deciding that he was most likely drunk, I stepped as close as I could to the road to give him the majority of the sidewalk to pass me by. The closer he got, the more I realized how gracefully he was moving. He was very tall and lanky, and he was wearing an old suit. He danced closer still, until I could make out his face. His eyes were open wide. His head was tilted back slightly, looking off at the sky. His mouth was forming a painfully wide cartoon of a smile. I decided to cross the street before he danced any closer. I took my eyes off of him to cross the empty street. As I reached the other side, I glanced back, and then stopped dead in my tracks. He had stopped dancing and was standing with one foot in the street, perfectly parallel to me. He was facing me but still looking up, smile still wide on his lips. I was completely unnerved by this. I started walking again, but kept my eyes on the man, and he didn't move. Once I had put about half a block between us, I turned away from him for a moment to watch the sidewalk in front of me. The street and sidewalk ahead of me were completely empty. Still nervous, I looked back to where he had been standing to find that he was gone. For the briefest of moments, I actually felt relieved, until I noticed him. He had crossed the street and was now slightly crouched down. I couldn't tell for sure due to the distance and the shadows, but I was sure he was facing me. I had looked away from him for no more than 10 seconds, so it was clear that he had moved pretty fast. I was so shocked that I stood there for some time, staring at him, and then he started moving towards me again. He took giant, exaggerated tiptoe steps, almost like he was a cartoon character sneaking up on someone, except that he was moving very, very quickly. I want to say that at this point I ran away, or I pulled out my spray or my cell phone or anything at all, but I didn't. I just stood there, completely frozen as the smiling man crept towards me, and then he stopped again, about a car length away from me, still smiling, still looking to the sky. When I finally found my voice, I said the first thing that came to my mind, "What the fuck do you want?" in an angry, commanding tone. What came out was a whimper. Whether humans can smell fear, they can most definitely hear it. I heard it in my own voice, and that only made me more afraid, but he didn't react. He just stood there, smiling. And then, after what felt like forever, he turned around, very slowly, and started dance walking away. Just like that. Not wanting to turn my back to him again, I just saw him go, until he was far enough away to almost be out of sight. And then I realized something. He wasn't moving away anymore, nor was he dancing. I was watching as the distant shape of him grew larger and larger. He was coming back my way, and this time he was running. I ran too. I ran until I was off on the side road and back onto a better lit road with traffic. Looking behind me then, he was nowhere to be found. The rest of my way home, I kept glancing over my shoulder, always expecting to see his stupid smile, but he was never there. I lived in that city for 6 months after that night, and I never went out for another walk again. There was something about his face that always haunted me. He didn't look drunk. He didn't look high. He just looked very completely insane. And that is a very, very scary thing to see. I'm not afraid of a ghost, devils, or monsters. It's people that scared me. So one night my boyfriend and I were fighting. I got tired of the fighting, and I chose to leave. I knew my brother would be picking up my son from work, but it would be at 1 in the morning. I sat there thinking just waiting till daylight, but my boyfriend just kept on and on. It didn't make matters better that I kept rolling my eyes and putting my hands up in the air, mimicking a talking mouth. Yeah, I know I probably wasn't helping, but I finally had enough, and the place where my son worked was about 3 miles away from my boyfriend's house. So in the middle of him saying stuff to me, I just got up and walked out. I could hear him locking the door behind me. It wasn't the first time he had locked me out. I just shrugged my shoulders and said, "Later, asshole." It was about 10:30 when I left. I was thinking what the best way would be, so off I went. I guess half of the way there was lit by street lights, so I wasn't too concerned. When I got down to the highway that led to my son's work, I didn't know if I should take the highway or the other way that went by a very old house. A house that I heard was haunted since I was a kid. Oh, and there was also some kind of animal thing that roamed around that area. My cousins called it the monkey bears, because that's what it looked like to us when we saw it. So I took the off-ramp and looked around. I was scared, I'll admit it. Well, the other light came from the moon, which wasn't very bright anyway, and no one was out and about, so I had no fear of being kidnapped. I started telling myself how stupid I was to leave, that I didn't want to be fighting all night. So here I'm walking and trying really hard to think good positive thoughts, not the ones that you think of that scare you. So then I decide that I'm gonna sing. So I start singing, and I put my hands in my pockets because it's a little chilly outside. Again, kicking myself for being out this late at night. I would get onto my kids for doing it, but hey, do as I say, not as I do. I'm walking and I almost trip myself on the rocks as I start laughing because only I could do that. I trip on air and up the stairs. I know, that's how I am. I'm kind of like listening to the night sounds, so I hear chirping. Not sure if it's crickets or frogs, but then I hear what sounds like someone stepping on the very rocks that I had just almost tripped on. I take a deep breath and think to myself, fuck no, I didn't hear that, and I say to myself, stop trying to scare yourself. I didn't say it very loud, but then I heard it again. I'm off the off-ramp at this point, and on the 4-lane highway. A car is coming, and I think I'm gonna look behind me as it gets closer. Well, it passes and I don't see anything. So as I'm walking, I'm thinking, damn, you're just trying to scare yourself. I shake my head and roll my eyes. I decided to walk a little faster. However, I'm not gonna run. I remember being told not to run if you hear something following you. But damn, if I walk, it might get me anyway. So I decided to use my phone's light. And lucky for me, my phone was basically dying. So I'm walking and I can still hear something behind me. And I stop real fast and turn around. I'm not sure what I was thinking. Cause one, if it's a person, what am I gonna do? And two, if it's a monster, what am I gonna do? But there's nothing there. But I know I heard someone there. I know I did. I started thinking to myself again that I'm just being paranoid. I laughed out loud and turned around and said to myself, you've seen this in a movie before. The brown one dies first. I turn around and by this point I'm getting close to the bridge and the grass is taller. At this point I don't care. I start running. And as I start running, I swear to God, I can hear something running in the grass. But then I make it past the bridge and I see another car coming. I don't care at this point. I'm gonna run or try to run the rest of the way. My fat ass better move. So as the car passes me, I'm thinking that they're most likely laughing at me. But as they pass, they slam on the brakes and come back in reverse. I'm thinking, oh hell no. There's no way I'm going inside a car with someone I don't know. They pull up beside me. I'm out of breath and my side is hurting as I'm having to bend over because I'm sucking air. The window comes down and the native guy says, it's a little late to be out here, ain't it? I then say that I'm going to the hospital because I'm going to meet my ride there. Mind you, I don't know the guy, nor the girl that was driving, or even the scared looking guy in the back. Wait a minute. He looks like he's seen a ghost. And then I look at the girl driving and her eyes are big. I'm like, oh shit, I'm in trouble. The guy then opens the door and says, we can give you a ride the rest of the way. Get in. I then said no thanks. It's right around the bend. And that's when the guy in the back seat says, get in now. It wasn't mean, but the way he said it kind of scared me. And I was like, sure, fine. I get in the car and she literally burns rubber. I'm like, dang girl, slow down. As I'm riding in the car, I feel uneasy about the situation. I know my heart is pounding and my pulse is probably skyrocketing. I try to act like I'm not scared at all, hoping that the brave face that I got going on is working. I'm looking around, and I do like to fidget with things. The guy in the back seat is just looking out the window, and looking out the back window. I'm thinking that this ride is taking forever, and I'm sure this dude is tweaking. Fuck, I should have just stayed put. But then, the guy in the front seat takes out a cigarette. He and the girl driving keep looking at each other, and this is making me feel uneasy. He lights the cigarette and starts talking to himself. He then blows the smoke in the girl's driving face. He continues on and then he blows smoke in our direction. Then he blows out smoke and covers himself in it. I understand what he just did, but I'm not sure why. He then pinches off the end and starts emptying the cigarette while praying. I'm not liking the scenario now. We then pull off into the off-ramp and I see the hospital. As you can imagine the relief that I'm feeling. We pull in and I tell her just drop me off at the entrance. She nods and looks at me with this look like she's scared. I don't know what the fuck that was on the side of the road, but it was following you. I could literally feel my heart drop into my stomach. She turned her face away from me and shook her head. The guy in the back seat starts to nod as well. The guy that rolled down the window looks at her and then looks at me and says, I never seen anything like that. And all I can say is if we didn't give you a ride, whatever that thing was, it would have gotten you. I could see it watching us when we tried to get you in the car. I thought I was gonna have to grab you and take off. I look at the guy in the back seat and he won't even look at me now. I look at the guy in the front seat and he has his head down, but then he looks at me and says, I said a prayer for us back there. because what I saw scared me, and I don't scare easily. I'm trying to hold back tears, but one of them comes down. I knew I heard someone or something, and it wasn't just my imagination, as now I'm even more scared than when I was walking. He then shakes his head and says, "Whatever the hell was that stepped out onto the road as we left." I hit my girlfriend on the leg, and that's why she looked at me all scared. She shook her head in agreement. I can tell you this though, in the pitch black of night you could still see it. It seemed blacker than the night, but white or gray light. It didn't look like a person, but it did. That thing was standing, but the way it stood there just didn't seem natural. If you don't have a ride, just say so, 'cause I don't want you walking again. If you were my sister, I would want someone to look out for you. I promised him my brother was coming, and I told him my son gets off at 1. He then said that he also prayed for us, 'cause he doesn't want whatever that was to follow any of us home. I then asked, "What else did you see?" And he said, "I'm gonna tell you once, and never talk about it again." I know my eyes got big 'cause I'm now truly scared. That thing had silver shining eyes. Nothing that I know of has eyes like that. But anyway, it went from standing to 4 legs. When we were talking and I was trying to get you in the car, it was looking at us. And when I saw it, I swear, for a split second, it smiled at me, and I can't get that out of my head. I look back at the guy in the back seat, and he's still not looking at me. He then looks at me and says, "The Creator was looking out for you. He put both of us together to meet this night. We're on our way to Broken Bow. We were gonna leave in the morning, but we decided to go ahead and pack up and go tonight." I can say that more and more. I'm just now completely shocked. I then thank the 3 of them for picking me up, and they just leave. I look around 'cause I just feel so uneasy still. I sat down on the bench and I just started crying. The security pulled up and I wiped my eyes, but the tears kept coming. I'm thinking to myself, man, stop being a crybaby. I then look at my phone and I have 10 minutes till my son gets off. But my brother pulls in and I go to his car and get in the back seat. He looks at me and says, "Y'all fighting again," and he hands me his blunt. "Take a hit off that. Calm yourself down." I then get home and I go to my room and I'm like scared 'cause we still live out in the sticks. My feet are hurting as I take off my shoes. My dog Bear comes running in. He stays real close to me, even going into the bathroom with me. I guess he can feel that I'm going through it. So we go to the living room and everyone is still up. I go to the kitchen to get me some soda, and that's when I hear it. This low guttural growl. And I feel like I can't move, or maybe I'm just too scared to turn around. The guys are being loud as they're playing Xbox. I then look at my front door. It's my dog making that growling noise. I never heard that from him before. He's sniffing and growling and pawing at the door. I'm scared as fuck again, and I'm just frozen. My brother is up now and looks at the dog and says, "Hey, cut that shit out." I look at him and he says, "At least it's out there and not in here. If it gets in here, then we worry." Bear is still doing that growling noise. I'm like, fuck this. Stop being a scary cat. I open the door and Bear hits the screen door and he runs out barking like he's about to get somebody. I'm scared all over again, 'cause I don't want my dog to die. He's a pit bull, but I'm not sure what he's after. I feel stupid 'cause I let him go, and whatever happens will be my fault. I swear off in the distance in the road, there's something standing there. However, at this point I think I'm only trying to scare myself now. I look around for Bear, and I don't hear him, so I call out for him, and he scares the shit out of me when he comes running up the stairs. For that brief moment, I took my eyes off the road. I look back and I shit you not, whatever it is, it's in my driveway. Now, we have a long driveway, and I look at the door to see how far I am away from it. I look back at my driveway, and there's something black, grayish looking still standing there. Bear then starts growling and barking, and I grab his collar, and with all the strength that I had, I muster a sound like I'm not the least bit afraid, and I yell, "Get off my property right now. You're not welcome here." Bear is also trying the best that he can to get loose from me. I open the door and put him in. I go inside and I light my sage and cedar and I start praying. And that's about it. The reason I didn't go into detail about it is because every time that I talk about this situation or about this thing, it's because something weird always happens. When I told my boyfriend, he just rolled his eyes and said, "Oh wow," but I kid you not, later that day, the lights started to flicker. When I told my best friend, her TV paused and it wouldn't work. We weren't even watching a movie or anything. We were simply watching The View as we ended up turning it off. I know this isn't scary, but I did tell a friend about it, and this was right at night. And after I did tell him, his dog started barking and growling. My dogs last night, as I was sharing my story with you, were pacing and kept doing this strange kind of bark. I then said out loud, "You're not welcome here." My daughter pulled her headphones off and said, I simply just shook my head. I lit my sage and prayed again. I haven't had any weird shit happen, except for like last night. So I'm actually writing this during the daytime. Some things are better not to be talked about. Stay safe, everyone. I really began getting into hunting a few years ago. I started out hunting with my uncle on his property. From the first Thanksgiving week that we went out, I was hooked. Watching my uncle walk ahead of me, creeping as quietly as can be, me following behind, scanning the trees and bushes on all sides, each of us with our shotguns ready to swing them up like a rubber band at the first sign of movement. It was quite an experience, especially after a long week of seeing almost nothing. I ended up shooting my first deer, a medium-sized doe. The whole series of post-hunting, gutting, skinning, breaking down the deer, and finally eating something that you hunt to yourself. But anyways, this story isn't really about my opinion or mindset on hunting. Rather, it's about what made me swear that I'll never go hunting again. After about 4 years of our ritual Thanksgiving deer hunts, I had to move away from my family to Upper Michigan. For those of you who don't know, Upper Michigan is a densely wooded area with lots of lakes. There aren't that many people living up there. The place I had to move to was right out near Cooper County. The summers were kind of humid, and the winter was terrible to deal with. I've never been to Alaska before, but it's the closest comparison I can come up with, given that I was kind of living on a peninsula. If you live in Florida, you should know about the extremes of weather that can come from living on a peninsula. Anyways, from the time that I first took the 20-hour drive moving up there, I noticed that once you pass Lower Michigan, across the bridge into Upper Michigan, there's nothing but trees and lots of semis traveling through the forest roads. It actually gave me a really creepy vibe that first time that I went up there. Like, what the hell am I moving to? But needless to say, hunting and fishing culture are already huge up there, so I was excited about that aspect. I never gone hunting by myself before, as it had only been a holiday activity, as it had only been a holiday thing to do with my family. My first year living up there, all of that would change. It turned out that because of Thanksgiving, I wouldn't be able to make the 20-hour drive one way due to my responsibilities at work. I was really bummed about not being able to spend Thanksgiving with my family, but I was gonna be damned if I would let this mess up my yearly deer hunting ritual. So when the day before Thanksgiving rolls around, I put on my uniform, grab my gun, and an old brownish colored tarp that I had that would make for a makeshift hunting blind once propped up with sticks. I also packed my tent in the car, in case I decided to just camp out and get my hunting on early Thanksgiving morning. I also brought some water, some venison jerky from the previous year, and a 15 pack of my favorite beer just in case I was feeling extra thirsty. Anyways, I had asked some local hunters where are some good spots on public land, and I drove out to one of those areas I had randomly chosen from the ones I was told about, since I'd never been to any of them before. The drive was full of hills and valleys, where the incredibly dense tree line, consisting mostly of pine, hugged the road. I'll be honest with you, I was a bit nervous. The lack of civilization on this road was getting me even more creeped out. It was early morning at this time, so a dense fog still hung in the trees. I was drinking my coffee, and I kept the radio off, mentally getting ready. But being the first time I was hunting alone, I was really focused on basic gun safety, survival techniques, and the common sense practices of hunting, such as when to use a call, drips of dull urine on my boots, as well as spraying myself down with canned dirt smell, and never forgetting my hunter's orange vest, and also a hat for when I was walking around outside the blind. I also had the antlers from last year's buck, which I thought I could use to rake against trees to attract some buck in the rut looking for a fight, a technique that I had seen on YouTube, but never really tried myself yet. I finally pulled up to some kind of makeshift rest stop area that I had been told about, a flat area of dirt where cars could pull off to one side, where you could enter the woods without having to park too close to the road. I shouldered my pack as well as my tent, and clipped on a fanny pack containing my large bag of jerky, and some other items such as a gutting knife, gloves, bandages, and so forth. I locked my car and began walking slowly through the woods, one slow step at a time, in order to avoid making too much sound by crunching sticks. My eyes scanned the surrounding trees as the fog began to lift, and the early morning sun began to rise. The woods were completely quiet at this time. As I progressed, I kept my eyes peeled for piles of leaves, or areas of dirt that had been rotted around him by some buck, as well as for scrapings on trees from the antlers. The first sign that caught my attention, however, was a pile of scat. It was warm to the touch, and as I kept moving, I found the ground turning from hard dirt into moss. There were a few other areas of scat that I also found, and also would appear to be a trail that looked like it might have been a deer highway, since the leaves were very flat and disturbed in this area. I decided to move about 50 yards away from this area in case it were a spot where the deer had been bedding down. I would be able to get them as they were either coming or going. I found a nice flat area where I had a good line of sight to the deer trail, and started clearing the ground of leaves and sticks. I found several larger sticks, and began setting up my tarp to make the blind. I was going to be in a kneeling, or laying position as I watched for the deer, and it just so happens to be the most steady position for aiming with my gun. I set my pack down and took out a few items such as my jerky, and began to chew on it while I waited, as well as my calls and a salt brick that I had brought with me just in case things turned desperate. I could at least hope that by putting the salt lick out, I would attract something overnight. The hours stretched long as I lay in the now completely silent forest, just staring out from one side and then another of the blind, thinking that every twig blowing in the wind might be a deer, and instead just being disappointed. There was nothing weird about this. I knew that hunting was often a waiting game, and that's what I had signed up for. As twilight came upon me, I had a last second thought that I might go walk around a bit, see if I could stir something up before nightfall. Before I was going to do that, I had to set my tent and get a little fire going so it would all be ready for me by the time that I got back. I also attached my trail cam to a tree facing that deer trail so I could take a look at what way they were going. After setting things up for the night, I grabbed my gun and began walking towards that trail, heading north. The sun was getting low, so I moved kind of quickly, not bothering too much about snapping twigs and moving the leaves around, not thinking I would be able to startle a deer and get the drop on it in a wooded area that I was completely unfamiliar with. I walked for what I thought was about a mile, when I finally crested a hill and was looking down into a thick wooded valley. I scanned the trees. I spied a small hunting cabin sitting there in the thick of it, somehow camouflaged well despite the smokestack billowing clouds of black smoke at the moment. I quickly grabbed my hat and looked at it, just double checking that I was wearing my orange, and I began to go down the hill towards the cabin, presuming that there were some other local hunters down there. I figured I would just see if they had any tips, or if they had already gotten something earlier. I was now entering what I presumed was private property, but due to the lack of posted signs, I wasn't too worried. It also seemed like someone had simply built this on the public land, not caring due to the fact that it was so remote and isolated from the main town areas. As I got close to the cabin, I realized that it was actually bigger than I had thought, and it didn't have windows on all sides like you might expect from a hunting cabin. As I went around front, I noticed that the leaves and brush had also been kept well clear from the structure. There was a makeshift roof front porch and was completely unlevel from rocks. I shouldered my gun and went up to the door, knocking a few times soft, and then a few times a bit hard. I didn't hear anything from inside, so I went around the side of the cabin and chanced to look into one of the windows, hoping that I wouldn't piss someone off who wanted nothing to do with me. I could still see the wood stove from the window, and it was cracked open, and it was glowing red inside. It was getting a bit chilly, and my heart melted at the thought of sitting next to such a stove all night. There was a rocking chair in front of the fire, and also an old wooden table in the corner with a bench near it, which was all I could make out through this window. I could tell there was another room to the cabin, most likely a bedroom in the back. I went back to the front door and called out pretty loud, "Hey, anyone home?" There was no answer. I shrugged my shoulders and began walking back up towards the hill when suddenly, without warning, snow began to fly all over at once. A cold front had definitely just come in, and I was actually starting to shiver. As I climbed the hill, the snow grew thicker. It almost looked like I was in for a blizzard. I started to get a really bad feeling since I had been checking the weather the whole week, and nothing of this sort had been predicted for the area. This meant that I had no idea just what to expect of the weather at this point. Whether this was just a squall, or if I was going to end up buried if I tried to sit in that tent tonight. It was now growing extremely dark. By the time that I crested the hill, I could see nothing, not even my own hand in front of me. That's when I stopped. I was having serious doubts I could find my way back to the camp in this kind of weather. Imagine getting completely lost and turned around in this blizzard with no shelter and no fire. For a moment, I considered the different options that I had. So the choice that I made is something that I'll continue to think about for the rest of my life. I chose to go back down to that cabin that I had found. Maybe the owner had returned by now, or maybe he got enough deer and left for the night. Either way, it was my only chance for shelter. I ended up groping my way tree by tree back to the cabin. I could make out that the chimney was still smoking, and I knocked again very loud, calling out, "Hello? Anyone home?" Again, I heard nothing in the now eerie silence of the forest. I turned the door handle and pushed the door open, immediately stepping into the small, warm room. By now, it was very chilly, so I quickly walked in, pulling the door shut behind me before calling out again to see if anyone was home. I noticed that indeed, there was another door leading to a back room, but it was closed. My boots were covered with snow, so I removed them and set them next to the wood stove. I then took off my jacket and coveralls, setting them on the back of the rocking chair to dry. The heat coming from the stove felt like heaven. I had another chance to look around the cabin. Even though the light was very dim, I spotted no flashlights, candles, or any source of light beyond the stove's glow. I noticed there was a pile of firewood in one corner, so I figured I would be able to keep the fire going all night. I quickly sat down in the rocking chair and began warming myself up. The coziness of the fire, in contrast to the cold wind outside, made me think of home. I felt terribly alone. I missed my family so much, and I was really beating myself up about a lot of things. What was I doing stuck out here by myself on Thanksgiving? Why didn't I come out here with a friend to at least share some of this? Well, some of this misery, that is. As I continued with those self-depressing thoughts, I noticed something sitting on the table. I stood up and went over to it. It was an old-fashioned growler with what looked like beer inside. I thought about the beers I had left back at the campsite, and how nice it would be to drink a few down while sitting by the fire. how it would shield me from this cloud of darkness that was now hanging over me. I did have my wallet with me, and I figured I could pay back whoever owned this cabin with interest for the trouble. I was very thirsty. I slipped a $20 bill on the table so that I wouldn't forget. I got the growler and sat back down in the rocking chair. I opened the top of it, smelled it. It wasn't beer in there, but a dark red wine. Oh well, I thought. I tipped the jug back and took a deep gulp of the dry, yet fruity red wine. I wasn't accustomed to drinking wine. In that moment, the burning in my belly felt like heaven. I then felt a lightness come over my head. After a few more drinks, before I knew it, I was floating into darkness, that is. When I woke up, I was now in a laying position, even though I had fallen asleep, in the rocking chair, that is. Sitting up, I quickly grabbed my chest and felt my torso, making sure that everything was okay, and that I hadn't been shot or something like that when I had dozed off. It was really warm before, but now it was cold, very cold. I looked around. It was dark. I could tell I was still in the same cabin. By this point, my eyes adjusted to the darkness, and from what I could tell, I was lying on the bench next to the table, and I quickly confirmed this by grabbing the table and pulling myself up into the sitting position. As I sat up, I accidentally kicked something with my foot, knocking it over. It was my boots. I then realized that I was laying on top of my hunting suit, as if it were a mattress. I sighed, realizing I must have gotten drunker than I thought, and somehow blacked out. I must have neglected the fire and made a little makeshift bed for myself on this bench. The rosy glow that was in the wood stove was now completely gone. I stood up slowly in the darkness and started putting my coveralls and boots in an effort to ward off the cold. I then walked slowly across the room through the darkness to the corner where I had spied that wood pile. I did feel around for some sticks to use as tinder, and grabbed a few larger pieces of firewood as well. As I returned to the stove, I realized I had nothing to light the fire with. I shoved the tinder in there first, hoping there was enough hot coals to light them. However, I couldn't even smell smoke coming out of it. A few minutes later, I felt the stove with my hand, and it was completely cold. I thought to myself about how the fire had died so completely when it had been glowing just a few hours ago. I couldn't remember whether I shut the door in the event of it possibly suffocating the fire. As I stood there thinking, there was a light that suddenly exploded in front of my eyes. I looked towards it, and I could tell it was a lit match. I now stood face to face with a man. He was kinda old. As I gazed into the thousands of tiny wrinkles covering his face, I saw that the eyes were not there. He didn't have eyes. That's when I screamed at the top of my lungs, but tripped on the firewood piled at my feet, smacking my head off on some part of the stove. I looked up and saw that the man was still standing there. He wasn't moving. I was on my feet in a second, adrenaline coursing through me, and I flew out the fucking door, my hunting jacket swinging in my hands. I stumbled across the porch and dove into the snow. When I looked down, I could tell there was a big pool of blood. Where I landed, I ran. Where I was running, I had no idea, but my legs were pumping. As I continued to run, the wind picked up, and I could have sworn I heard someone yelling something, but I could barely understand it over the wind. But it seemed to be the old man, repeating the same word over and over at the top of his lungs. It sounded like peacock. That's when I ran faster. I must have tripped a few times as I came across hills or small drop-offs that would send me flying halfway down a slope, even once into a frozen creek. I was soaked from head to foot by now, and covered in snow and mud, but I kept going anyway, despite the fact that I could no longer feel my feet at this point. When I finally calmed down and my pace had slowed, everything began to dawn on me. I had no idea what hour of the night it was, or how far, or in what way I was going. It could soon be dawn, or it could have been midnight for all I knew. I continued going as I started feeling cold, and the adrenaline was starting to wear off. I was actually starting to feel pretty strange, and began wondering whether there was something in that wine. From what I could see in the darkness, the forest now seemed completely different. The trees and their limbs started to look weird, almost like they were reaching out to me. After what seemed to be a couple more hours, I really began to think that I was just going around in circles, until I finally fell. Then, I spotted my only chance of salvation, a small opening in the side of a cliff, what looked like a bear cave. I took a deep breath, and I wish I could say there was even a moment's hesitation about how sketchy the situation was, especially inside this cave. But there wasn't. The cold now felt like it was tearing my skin off. I lowered myself into the cave, foot first, and actually had to claw my body into it. The opening was so tight. After I passed through an entrance that was most likely 3 times as long as my height, the cave actually opened up into a larger cavern where I could even stand up. Even though I was slightly bent at the waist, I quickly felt warm, with no way of seeing my surroundings. It was the kind of darkness your eyes can never adjust to. I took a few more steps, just touching the wall and sealing with my gloved hand, so that I wouldn't trip or hit my head on anything. However, I could go no further. Even though I knew I could get warmer a bit further from the entrance, I was terrified that there might be some animal or some sort of giant spider. Then, it suddenly dawned on me that there was some unusual weight in my right coat pocket. My hand immediately moved there, and I felt a small box. What the hell? I knew it was nothing I had put there. As I pulled it out, I felt a rough strip on one side of the box. I slid it open, realizing it was a box of matches. It must have been that crazy old man, but why? That's when I heard a strange noise that sounded like something moving from further into the cave. I quickly grabbed a match from the box and struck it. Once, then again, and the whole cave burst into a low light. As I looked around me, I saw a slight bend in the cavern in front of me, but nothing else. It was completely empty. A draft then picked up. I then heard the noise again, but more clearly this time. It was definitely some strange sounding footfalls joined by some kind of slithering sound. I wonder if there was some kind of snake disturbing some rocks or something, but I was hoping it wasn't. I fumbled with the matches again and was able to light one. The sound stopped as the cavern was again illuminated. I stood, listening, but I couldn't hear anything. It was quiet. Absolute silence. A second draft picked up, and again my match went out. Then I heard the same sound, but what sounded like either footfalls or falling rocks. The sound was happening very quickly now, and the slithering or dragging sound sounded like it was in the same area with me. My fingers fumbled, breaking one match, and then another, and then the cavern exploded with light again. In front of me, I saw a creature, dragging itself towards me with its arms. It looked human, except the legs were not there. The old man's words, the peacock, flickered into my mind as I stared at the holes in its body. Dark holes covered every inch of it. They were eye sockets, many of which were filled with hundreds of eyes that now stared at me. It now started to slither towards me. The eyes blinked and stared at me as it let out a hissing sound. It seemed to be in pain from the light of the match. As it came within reach, I screamed and threw the match at it. I reached for my hunting knife. I tripped and fell over. I struggled, but I could feel it overpowering me. I felt its fingers searching for my eyes, pressing and gouging hard. I couldn't get to my knife, but I grabbed 5 or 6 matches at a time and struck them together, creating some huge flame. The creature then shrunk away from me, but it blocked the entrance. It shrieked very horribly, its hundreds of eyes blinking at me. I then started running deeper into the cave, in the same direction it had come from, and I haven't stopped running. I thought long ago I would have come to a dead end, and I was going to have to face it again, but I haven't. Whenever I stop for too long, I can hear it slithering from behind me. I'm not sure how deep I've gone now. I'm not sure how long I've been running for, but it seems like it's a maze of caves down here. If I make it out of this, I will never come back to Michigan. Shit, I'll never go hunting again. Don't come up here. And don't go into any cabin or any cave in Michigan. Stay away from here. I thought long ago I would have come to a dead end and was gonna have to face this creature again, but I haven't. But I've been running out of matches, and there's only a few left. My phone's almost dead, and I'm recording all of this on my phone. I do have my knife, and I'm ready to use it. But if anyone finds this, just know, if I'm somehow being punished for all of this, for taking the life of an innocent creature, if the hunter has now truly become the hunted, I will never go hunting again. I swear, God above me, I swear, please. If you find this, just tell my family one thing. Tell them. This is one of the scariest experiences that has ever happened to me. Even simply by writing this, it brings back so many nightmares. And it reminds me as to why I will never go camping again. I had been attending Camp Rock Water for about 4 years now. I used to love camping, being able to see some new faces, getting to do fun and exciting activities. My favorite was the river rope swing. I never wanted to leave that swing once I got on. I was just so excited to go back, mainly because it would be my last year I went. And then summer finally came, and it was finally time to go camping. When I got to camp after a 4-hour car ride, I was so excited. I was remembering all my old favorite places. First things first, my mom had to take me to the lodge to get signed up. When we got into the lodge, there were a lot of people there. We waited in line until it was our turn to sign up. Before we were handed any papers, the lady at the table told us that there had recently been some weird things going on a few miles down through the woods from us. I just brushed it off and ignored it. I think I was just too excited to finally be able to go to camp again. My mom helped me lug my suitcase to the cabin. When we got there, I was so happy to see some old friends from last year. Kyle was one of my longtime camp friends. He was sitting in the corner making his bed. Jacob, another one of my really good friends, was on the floor taking stuff out of his bag. And who could forget about Brad? He was putting stuff in the closet, like baseball bats and golf clubs. As for the other 2 kids, I had no idea who they were, but they both seemed to like me. It turns out they were brothers. Their names were Brandon and Nathan, and it being their first year here, they were kind of nervous. We all got settled in, and after our parents left, we sat down and started talking about past adventures in camp. It wasn't for another hour that our cabin leader arrived. When he got in, he kind of looked at us all with a gloomy face. He turned to us and said, "Hey guys, I'm your cabin leader for the next 2 weeks. Now, before we do anything, I have to tell you that some things have changed, and we will have to be more cautious due to the weird things that have been happening." We all were a little uneasy, but we wouldn't let that stop us from having the best summer ever. The day continued on as normal. We introduced ourselves, played some cards in our cabin, went outside and played basketball, went to the mess hall to eat, and came back to the cabin to sleep. It was kind of strange that there were only 6 cabins full of people, when there's always around 30. So the next day we woke up. It was raining hard. The sounds of the rain smacking the metal roofs of the cabins echo off to the distance. The camp leader was nowhere to be found. So we kind of sat around the middle of the cabin, just waiting for our cabin leader to get back. We then started talking about some ghost stories that happened around the camp. Some of them seemed completely stupid, but others were kind of scary. And just to let you all know, outside of our cabin, there were about 400 acres of woods. In those woods, there were some obstacle courses, the chapel, and the river. There was one more thing in the woods that nobody really knew about. because it was so far off. It was the original Camp Rock water cabins. There were only a few of the older cabin leaders that knew about it and how to get to them. They say that back in the early 1900s, when the camp was first established, 2 kids got into a fight in their cabins, and one kid killed the other in his sleep. He had apparently taken a heavy rock and dropped it on the other boy's head. Legend has it that the presence of the boy who was killed is seen walking around the old campground and chapel. They say that the boy can sometimes be seen crying at the back of the chapel. Someone even said they went to the cabins and saw his head peeking out from one of the windows. At this point, everyone in our cabin was really scared. I swear, Brad was gonna have a panic attack. That's when our camp leader came rushing in through our cabin door. He told us that we needed to pack our things and go to the lodge. We would have to call our parents in the morning to tell them to take us home. We walked all the way from our cabin to the lodge in the rain, completely wet. When we got there, only 4 other cabins had been there. As I was sitting next to the fireplace with my cabin mates, we overheard people talking about what was going on. Someone had said that all of cabin 6 had gone missing after returning from the chapel. The conversations after that got really boring, that we ended up falling asleep in the lodge. Later that night, I woke all of my friends. I wanted to go and check out what happened in the woods. Call me stupid all you want, but mind you, I was also younger. Though at first all of my friends didn't want to go, they still agreed to tag along with me. We grabbed a few flashlights and snuck past the cabin leaders that were sleeping near the exit. When we got outside, it was still raining, but now it was also pitch black outside. This still didn't stop us from heading over to the woods. When our group finally got to the mouth of the woods, Brad and Jake just couldn't do it. They walked back to the lodge through the shortcut in the gardens. All that were left were Kyle, Brandon, Nathan, and I. We walked slowly through the path that leads to the chapel. Every now and then, we would trip over some uprooted trees, but we still kept going. We could see the chapel ahead of us, but we knew there was something wrong. It was very quiet. The rain had stopped too, and there was no wind, nor any kind of animal in sight. As we walked up to the chapel, Brandon, who was carrying one of the flashlights, just started screaming. He then ran as fast as he could back towards camp and dropped his flashlight. The light was shining through the chapel, and I kid you not, through one of the windows, we saw the face of a child crying. That's when we all screamed and started to run towards the camp as well. Out of fear, we lost all sense of direction and had no idea where any of us were. As we came up to the ravine that led down to the river, that's where we saw in the pitch darkness a silhouette of a small black figure that was blocking our way. Our only way out was taking the ravine. Nathan, Kyle, and I began going down the side of the ravine, and we noticed another figure. That's when I shot my flashlight down a ways, and there was Brandon, just lying dead, with his head smashed in, blood everywhere. To be honest though, it seemed like he had tripped maybe on an uprooted tree and fell down the side of the ravine, but we had to just keep running, so we left him there. We were halfway down the ravine when we could feel the sweat falling into our eyes like ocean water, and there it was again, the figure of a little boy standing at the end of the ravine, waiting for us to play with him. I told everyone just to keep running, and that's when I looked behind us, and Nathan had disappeared. He was no longer with us. I'm not sure if he took another way or ended up running a different path or back, but he was completely gone. Kyle and I kept running, And that's when I saw the old stairs coming up to our left that led back up to the back part of camp. When we got to the stairs and we were almost to the top, that's when we could hear a kid saying, "We can play with the rocks." We didn't even stop to look back. We ran all the way to the lodge. When we got there, all of the cabin leaders had been away. 2 other cabins had left to go investigate what was going on in those woods. They both went missing. And then Kyle finally spoke up. Even though he hadn't said anything all night, he did say, "I saw him. The boy just wanted to play with us." And that was it. The next morning, our parents picked all of us up, and we never went back again. Years have passed since that encounter. Kyle was booked into a mental hospital. They said for some serious mental issues that he had going on. Jake and Brad were never found, and nobody ever mentioned anything about them after that day. As for the other 3 cabins of kids, nobody ever found out what happened or where they went. Maybe nobody cares. But I will tell you this though, after this experience, I have never, nor will I ever, go camping again. My grandfather told me a story once as we sat around a campfire in his backyard in the cool night of the Arizona desert. The horizon was clear, and each star twinkle in a purple sky, with a full fat moon hanging low over the mountains. His voice was raspy, the result of a lifetime of smoking cigars and drinking whiskey. The fire danced and shined across his wide dark eyes as he settled into his seat, ready to tell his story. Way back when I was a boy, about your age, I lived outside a reservation with your great-grandfather. He had returned from the war and set about raising horses and cattle on a 100-acre ranch settled between a brambly mountainside with good dirt for growing thorn brush and not much else. One night, my mother was sick, and Pa and I took a trip into town, about 50 miles away, straight through the dry desert, over a washed-out creek and some old abandoned farmsteads. Pa and I were driving in an old Ford pickup truck. I remember it was dark out, inky and thick, with only the lights of our old truck lighting up the road. I remember it so much. The engine began to sputter, and the truck slowed to a jerky stop. "Damn it," Pa said, guiding the Ford to the side of the road. As it coasted to a stop, my pa said, "Stay here, son," and he stepped out into the darkness, shutting the door with a heavy thud. My window was down, and the cool desert air was breezy and felt good on my hot face and neck. Pa was getting water from the back to cool down the engine, and that's when I smelled it. Rotten eggs. Strange, I thought, to smell sulfur in the desert. My nose also picked up the smell of one of those dead, bloated cattle that would drop from the heat and lay there until the crows pecked enough holes in their hide to cause the whole thing to explode. It stunk, and I gagged. My skin started to tingle too. The back of my neck felt itchy, and my face started to get very hot. The wind stopped blowing, with the stink filling the cab. "Pa," I called out. No answer. My heart started beating, and I felt such a fear in me, in my bones, in my chest. I tell you, I never felt fear like this. Not until Vietnam. Not until I saw men dying around me. I locked the door and reached over for my pa's door and saw a shadow bound across the road through both dim beams of light across the partly open hood. Grandfather paused telling the story. He spit a fat piece of tobacco to his side. and he looked very pensive into the darkness. I realized I was holding my breath and gasped for air. The night was breezy, but I was sweating and clammy. "What about your father? What did you see?" My grandfather, continuing the story, sighed. "A creature." He shook his head. "You have to understand, there were legends. Old legends. Much older than what's out there in the valley. Older still than Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull, than the old chiefs and their shamans, the Appalchia and Hopi and Cherokee, and all them old tribes and First Peoples. They told tales. They told stories about dark magic. Something about a deal made with the old spirits of blood sacrifice to gain power, old power, enough to fight each other and the Spaniards, and later the white man that came for their land and women. They called them." He paused. Grandfather took a deep breath and looked towards the fire, to the sky, the desert, the creek, the moon, the sun, and then leaned a little bit and said, "They would call them Skinwalkers, old warriors, resurrected as skinless men, walking on deer legs, with the torso of a man and the head of a coyote, but they were messed up, long and disfigured, teeth like a Bowie knife, long arms, and standing 7 feet tall, even hunched over. They would gut the old cowboys and white riders. They'll run through the bullets, part the Spanish armor like it was a potato sack. And boy, could they change their voice to match a person you knew or might know." And that's what I saw, big and fast. Only for a second, it ran across the road, gray and molted, muscle flexing under its legs, clumping on the road, stringy muscle hunched shoulders. And it turned, looked right into the cab, and looked at me, right into my eyes. And I swear, it grinned at me. I sank into my seat. In fear, shaking, I knew my death was coming. I smelled ozone and brimstone. The air felt like right before the lightning comes and blows a tree to smithereens, charged and full with power. I yelled for Pa, but no words came out, just a dry squeak. I started to shake as my grandfather told his story. He was still here, so I knew he lived. But the supernatural always fascinated me, and even now, I felt the force of his words. The real power of skinwalkers was trickery. Sure, they could change their voices, but also their skin. That's why the gods took their hide, so they could take others. Not for long, the legend says, maybe an hour, before the soul of the skin that they were wearing would come looking for their mortal shell, before going to whatever hell awaited them. Even though I think that getting skinned alive was hell enough. A minute passed in what felt like a lifetime, 1 second in 1,000 years. My father's door opened, and I jerked my head to the left, putting up my hands to fend off an attack. "Son, it's me," my father said. Before climbing into the cab, he got the steering wheel and pulled himself in an awkward way, jerking himself into the seat. I cringed into the corner. I looked at him. I looked hard. Your great-grandfather was a good man. Treated me and my mom right. He fought the Nazis and saw the worst of man in Poland when he freed all those camps. And now, I was taking his measure. Is this my father? Do I make a run? Or do I die? Is it him or not? Let's go get that medicine for your mom, as he pulled the truck into gear and pulled it out into the road. and our trip resumed. I guess it was him after all. But how did you know? Was it because he said something about your mom? I knew, because out the window, out the corner of my eye, I saw that same beast running 50 miles an hour right next to our car, looking at me with those yellow eyes and grinning mouth. I looked and saw it, hunched and angry, running next to us. My pa kept his eyes on the road, looking straight ahead. "Son," he said, "don't look at it." That's how I knew it was my dad. He knew what to do, and he kept telling me to just keep looking straight ahead and to not look at whatever was around us, running. He then told me that by acknowledging its presence, you give it power. That's where my grandfather finished the story. I kept staring at him, but by this time, he was just looking straight ahead, looking around me, and said we should go inside. As we went inside the house, he then told me to not ever mention Skinwalkers. He also said that speaking their name out loud or mentioning them at all, even in text, even in stories, even if someone else is telling you a story, is supposed to make them aware of your existence.